Chapter 1181. What's the matter? Why are you so panicky? How can you be so calm? Looking at the cowardly side of his subordinate, Xianxia reprimanded him. He had already decided to punish this messenger after the big battle. Without paying attention to Xianxia's displeasure, the messenger knelt on the ground and said with a trembling body, "Marquis, the Walla army has retreated. They didn't have the intention to greet us and rushed out of the barracks." Hearing the news that the Walla army had retreated, Xianxia's eyes narrowed for no reason and he had a bad premonition. During this period of time, everyone had been on guard against each other and they were no longer as sincere as they were at the beginning. However, even though he was mentally prepared, Xianxia was still very angry when he heard that they had retreated without fighting. Got it. He just said that there's more. What else? There's more. Deputy Chief Guang has escaped with 50,000 infantrymen under him. As if he had exhausted all his strength, the messenger mustered up the courage to finish speaking. What? Hearing this news, Xianxia's expression changed drastically. He turned around abruptly and the sword on his body was placed on the messenger's neck. With the cold sword on his neck, the messenger's face suddenly turned pale. However, since Xianxia had asked this question, he had to answer it. He could only continue to speak. Just now, Deputy Chief Guang has retreated with his troops. They withdrew all the troops that were attacking the city and fled to the south. Ayayat Guang, you've ruined Marquis' plan. Hearing that Guang had also escaped, Xianxia's expression changed drastically. Although Guang only had 50,000 soldiers in his hands, he was responsible for attacking the first city. Once they retreated, the 5-star army in the first city would no longer be in danger. At the same time, they might be behind him. If that was the case, how could he resist? Not to mention, after days of bitter battles, the 50,000 soldiers under Guang had experienced life and death situations. They could be described as elites. Once they left, not only would their combat power be greatly reduced, they would also not be able to find a replacement. Guang's escape added even more uncertainty to the battle. In a fit of anger, he swung his saber and the messenger's head flew into the air. Xianxia, who had killed someone, had red eyes and even his arms were trembling. It was obvious that he was angry in his heart. Report. Marquis, the 4 gates of the first city have been opened. They've rushed out of the inner city and are heading toward our camp in the outer city. Another messenger rushed over on horseback. Before he arrived, his shout had already resounded in the air. If Guang was still around, they would have been able to more or less delay the 5-star army in the city from leaving the city since they had already taken down the outer city. But now it was too late. Xianxia's body shook slightly on the horse. Before the battle had even begun, the result had already been decided. Now that he was facing internal and external troubles, he knew that he had already lost. Xianxia forced himself to stay alert. He looked at Rong Xiao, who was not far away, and said to the bodyguard beside him, "Ask General Rong to come over. Also, you go and inform General Fong to retreat immediately." Rong Xiao was still riding on his horse, feeling the tense atmosphere before the battle. For him, who was on the battlefield for the first time, this feeling was very exciting. It caused his adrenaline to rise uncontrollably. His face also turned a lot redder because of this. "General Rong, Marquis wants to see you." The bodyguard walked over and conveyed Xianxia's military order. Okay, thank you for your trouble." Rong Xiao was very excited when he heard that Xianxia wanted to see him. He, who had focused all his attention on the battlefield, did not know what had happened behind the scenes. If he knew, he would not be happy but scared to death. He came in front of Xianxia with an excited face. He tried his best to appear calm in order to leave the best side of Xianxia. "Not bad. It's General Rong's first time on the battlefield, yet you're so calm. You truly have the demeanor of a great general." Xianxia, who was trying his best to raise his spirits, praised Rong Xiao. This time, whether they could successfully escape or not depended on this person. "Thank you, Marquis, for your praise. This is all because of your leadership." Rong Xiao did not dare to take the credit. "Very good. You are not anxious or impatient. Not bad. Since that is the case, I will leave the first battle to you. Can you complete it?" There was no time and Xianxia did not want to prepare any more groundwork. He went straight to the point. Hearing that he could be the vanguard, Rong Xiao was very excited. He patted his chest and said, "Mari, please rest assured. Our swords and arrows want to drink blood. We want to have a taste. Okay, I approve. You can go. As long as you make a great contribution, Marquis will definitely report it to the Emperor and ask for your reward. Seeing Rong Xiao so set off, Shi Heng's face finally showed a trace of satisfaction. Thank you, Marquis. Rong Xiao cupped his fists and said gratefully. He then turned around and rode away. He did not know that once he left he would never return. Let's retreat. After looking at Rong Xiao's back, Shi Heng turned around and left. War was like this. It was either you die or I live. In order to survive, he could only sacrifice Rong Xiao and his 100,000 troops. On the other side, Shi Heng's order also reached the ears of Liaodong Iron Cavalry General Fong Dingshan. You want us to retreat? What the hell? Fong Dingshan, who had long been prepared to compete with the 5-star troop, was obviously unhappy. He looked at the messenger with a glint in his eyes and a murderous aura exuded from his body. General, this is Marquis order. The messenger thought for a moment and was afraid that Fong Dingshan would vent his anger on him. Marquis had already killed one and he did not want to be the second. Thinking of this, he carefully moved forward and said, General, the Walla cavalry has already retreated. General Tsingguang also left with his troops. When Marquis told me to inform you, he was also prepared to retreat. What do you think? Fong Dingshan, who was about to vent his anger on the messenger soldier, involuntarily paused. After about 3 breaths, he let out a long sigh. I see. Thank you for the information. General, you are too serious. Please hurry up. When the messenger heard Fong Dingshan's words of gratitude, he immediately let out a long sigh of relief. He then cupped his fists and left. After the messenger left, Fong Dingshan did not dare to delay any longer. He said to Luo Baikun, pass down the order. All troops retreat. Retreat. Military orders were like mountains. Although Luo Baikun still had a lot of questions since it was the general's order, he had to carry it out. After he agreed, he ordered the 70,000 Liaodong cavalry to retreat in echelons. Elites were indeed elites. Even when they were retreating, they were still orderly. Compared to the army led by Shi Heng and Tsingguang, who were fleeing in panic, they were much better. The 5-star army had arrived. According to yesterday's agreement, they launched a general attack at 3 in the morning. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers outside the city and tens of thousands of soldiers inside the city launched an attack together. If Shi Heng could have predicted this, or if he could have remained calm in the face of danger, with his advantage in numbers and the cooperation with the Wara cavalry, he might not have lost the battle. On the contrary, as long as he persevered, victory was not impossible. After all, the provisions of the new army in the beginning city had been used up. Just this morning, Xianxia took out all the food he had stored and made a delicious meal for the soldiers. It was as if he was going to break the axe and sink the boat. If such an opponent could be suppressed, it would only take a long time for the morale to drop and it would be time for a counterattack. Unfortunately, under a series of small actions and preparations, Baiming and Walla could not be of one mind, let alone fight the enemy together. When he learned that the 5-star army suddenly appeared in the east and north and began to attack, Leader Yeshen decisively gave the order to retreat. He could not guarantee that when the 5-star army arrived, the Baiming army could not be relied on. He would never put his hopes on the so-called allies, especially those who were not reliable. Yeshen's retreat was just a signal to retreat. Next was Tsingguang's 50,000 soldiers, Fong Dingshan's 70,000 Liaodong cavalry, and Shi Heng's 30,000 elite soldiers. An entire army of 200,000 retreated without a fight, leaving Rong Xiao and the 100,000 infantrymen on the battlefield. From an advantage to a disadvantage, the originally fierce battle ended up like this. It seemed to be a coincidence, but if one thought about it carefully, it was inevitable. If the alliance was not united, it would be better not to unite. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Having said that, Rong Xiao, who was completely unaware of all this, was riding on his warhorse in high spirits and watching his army get into formation to fight the enemy. As expected of a merchant, he knew how to maximize the benefits of everything. After receiving Shi Heng's order, he gathered the generals under his command and told them openly, "Let's go and see what's going on. I am a person who does not know much about war, nor do I know much about military matters. However, there is one thing that I know, and that is that it is natural for soldiers to eat grain. Therefore, what I want to do is to solve your worries. How about this? In this battle, no matter how the court rewards the generals who have made great contributions, I will reward them with 1,000 to 10,000 taels of silver. How about it? When there is a great reward, there will be brave men. Under the great reward, the generals were all excited. They all expressed that they would fight this battle well and add glory to Rong Xiao's face. Laughing with satisfaction, Rong Xiao watched the generals leave the tent. Humming an unknown tune, he called for the military singers and prostitutes, and just like that, they began to drink in the big tent. To Rong Xiao, as long as everything was arranged to the right people, he only needed to wait for the good news in the big tent. While drinking wine and watching the music and dance, he even imagined the scene of going to Shiheng to report his victory. Presumably this time he would definitely achieve great success. First city. All the cavalry warriors of the new army had done all the preparation work before 3 o'clock in the morning. They filled their stomachs, fed their warhorses, sharpened their swords and spears, and prepared their bows and arrows. As soon as the time was up, they would set off together and rush out of the city. They wanted to vent all the grievances that they had suffered during these days at this moment. Chapter 1182. As the commander of the army, Tiger's man wore an eye-catching purple cloak. It was the unique symbol of a first-rank officer. At this moment he was also riding on a horse with a scimitar in his hand. He had given the order for the entire army to charge. According to the plan, the 5-star army outside the city would attack half an hour before the hour of the 5-star army. After all, the distance between the two sides was quite far and it would take some time for them to rush over. The 5-star army inside the city would only need to wait for the hour of the 5-star army to pass before launching their attack. Just as the hour of the 5-star army passed by and Tiger's man was prepared to charge into the city, the scouts suddenly sent a message saying that the Baiming army on the outer city gate was beginning to retreat. What's going on? How is this possible? Tiger's man said with a face of disbelief. The war hadn't officially begun yet. How could the Baiming army retreat? Suspecting that this was a trap, Tiger's man personally led a group of generals to the inner city gate tower. As expected, they saw the Baiming soldiers fleeing in panic. Through the binoculars, they could clearly see the Baiming army soldiers on the outer city gate tower quickly rushing down the city. Some people even threw the Baiming dragon flag in their hands to the ground in order to save time. There were also some soldiers who were pushing each other and cursing as they went down the city gate. Some of the more violent ones even attacked, but there were no deaths. This can't be fake, right? Deng Yu, the commander of the new 1st Army's 2nd Cavalry Division, who saw all of this through the binoculars, couldn't believe it. After all, chaos before the war had even begun. This didn't make sense, so it was normal to think more about it. Fake? If this is all an act by the Baiming army for us to see, then I can only say that they shot themselves in the foot. What's so scary about an army without any morale? How could they be a match for our new 1st Army? Tiger's man put down the binoculars and said with a proud expression. In a battle between two armies, the level of morale often determined the outcome of the battle. Unless it was a very elite army, otherwise, it was absolutely impossible to stage such a scene because it was very likely that the morale of the army would really be lax and out of control. That's right. It's very likely to be true. Although we don't know what's going on outside, we shouldn't miss such an opportunity. Commander, I suggest we launch the attack in advance. Lu Zhuo, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, requested after putting down his binoculars. That's right, our heavy cavalry regiment requests for battle. Regiment Commander Windchaser said. Our light cavalry regiment is fast, we also request to fight. Commander Ma Xiangshan did not forget the last time they encountered the Liaodong Iron Cavalry that retreated without a fight. Although there was a military order for him to retreat at that time, and although it seemed that the order was correct, it was still a humiliation to him and the light cavalry regiment. Even in his dreams he wanted to take revenge. Our reconnaissance regiment also requests to fight. Regiment Commander Ding Shan also stood up. Okay, seeing that it was about to become a mobilization meeting, Tiger's mane quickly waved his hand. Since everyone is so full of fighting spirit, then I don't think there's any need to prioritize. Let's go out in 4 cities. In short, we have to go all out and defeat the enemy. Yes. There was no need to fight. Everyone could go out of the city with the fastest speed to join the battle. The Tiger generals were all eager to try, and their faces were full of murderous intent. Next, the generals rushed down the city. Then, the 4 main city gates of the first city which led to the outside world were all opened. Then the vast cavalry army rushed out and rushed to the barracks behind Rong Xiao's army, which was not prepared. After receiving Rong Xiao's promise of a heavy reward, the generals were full of fighting spirit. Because of this, they all wanted to make the first contribution. The generals who were supposed to be in charge of the security at the rear also moved their troops to the front. In this way they could find an opportunity for themselves. It was precisely this kind of move that made their rear seem very empty. When the new cavalry army rushed out of the inner city, smoothly passed through the outer city, and arrived at the rear of the Baiming army, they did not encounter any decent resistance at all. Although the division commanders and regimental commanders were also very curious as to why such a result occurred, they did not stop attacking. Instead, when they arrived at the rear of Rong Xiao's army and saw that the enemy's rear was undefended, one by one, they pounced forward like wolves and tigers. They did not care why such a fatal loophole appeared in the Baiming army. They only knew that if they did not take advantage of the situation they would be bastards. Since the enemy was not prepared, they only needed to charge forward. They would definitely not greet the enemy first and give the enemy time to prepare for battle. As a result, the Baiming army was in a tragic situation. Suddenly, tens of thousands of cavalrymen from the 5-star army appeared behind them. It was as if the heavens had descended from the sky. Several Baiming army that had reached tens of thousands of soldiers were almost defeated after being stabbed in the butt. This kind of defeat quickly affected the other Baiming army nearby. Some generals even did not know what to do with their troops. Should they prepare their bows and arrows to kill the 5-star army? Or should they turn around and deal with the 5-star army that had suddenly appeared behind them? Even the generals could not make a decision at the first moment. The soldiers below were even more chaotic. Many soldiers had fled before the battle. There were also many people who were smart enough to kneel on the spot and raise their weapons high. They were already prepared to surrender. 100,000 soldiers. Although it seemed like a lot, if they really fought, it would be difficult to kill them all even after a day and a night. However, when the thoughts of surrendering and fleeing took over, it was not that difficult to deal with. In less than an hour the army began to collapse. When the 5-star army arrived in front of them, it did not take much effort for them to easily obtain victory. The 1st Cavalry Division was the most outstanding cavalry. Under the leadership of Division Commander Tian Hu, they were the first batch of 5-star army cavalrymen to charge into the Baiming army. The original 10,000 soldiers had now expanded to 20,000 under Yang Qindong's special permission. This was also their first battle after the expansion. Division Commander Tian Hu's request for everyone was to perform well, especially the veterans. They had to set an example for the new recruits and let them know what it meant to be invincible and invincible. When the 20,000 cavalrymen rushed over excitedly, they saw that the Baiming army was basically defenseless. The scene of kneeling and surrendering was so spectacular and so ironic. Even Division Commander Tian Hu, who had experienced countless bitter battles, did not know how to describe what he was seeing at this moment. Division Commander, what is going on? 1st Cavalry Division Commander Taimur rode to Tian Hu's side and scratched his head with a confused expression. Not only Commander Taimur, but even Tian Hu himself did not know what was going on. However, he was still a division commander and had been placed in an important position by Yang Qindong. His ability to adapt was still very strong. After a short moment of hesitation he said, "Let's not care about that. We will continue the pursuit as planned. As for these captives, let the people behind us deal with them." The 1st Cavalry Division was the strongest cavalry division. What they should be doing was searching for the strongest opponent that matched their status, not standing here and receiving captives. After Tian Hu gave the order, the 20,000 cavalrymen leaped over the captives and continued to charge forward as if they did not see them. Even when they passed by Rong Xiao's camp, they did not have any intention of stopping. Following closely behind were the New Army and the Liaodong Cavalry Division. They only stopped for a moment before making the same decision as the 1st Cavalry Division. They let go of the Baiming captives and continued to chase forward. Before they came, Yang Qindong had personally given the order that their opponents this time were the Walla Cavalry and the 70,000 Liaodong Cavalry of Baiming. As long as they dealt a heavy blow to them, the 5-star army would have no opponents on the grasslands in the future. This would be a great achievement. As for the Baiming captives who did not even have the will to fight, who would care about them? 3 armies passed by one after another without the slightest pause. This frightened Rong Xiao, who was in the tent. A moment ago he was still drinking wine and watching music. However, in the next moment someone came to report that the army was in chaos. The 5-star army cavalry appeared from all directions, and several generals had already knelt down and begged the 5-star army to surrender. The wine that he had just drunk was spat out from his mouth. Rong Xiao sat there in a daze as if he had been struck by lightning. It was not strange for him to have such an expression. If it was someone else, they would not be any better. It was just 100,000 Ming Dynasty soldiers. Even if infantry were weaker than cavalry, they should not have been defeated in less than an hour. Moreover, didn't they also have cavalry? Whether it was the Walla cavalry or the 70,000 elite Liaodong cavalry, what did they do? Did they also lose? There were too many things that he could not understand. At this moment, Rong Xiao did not know that Shi Heng and the cavalry had already escaped. He was still sitting there like a fool. Until the sound of tremors came from the tent, and someone came to report that the 5-star army cavalry was charging towards the tent. Rong Xiao was even more cowardly as he buried his head under the table. He did not even dare to raise his head. He did not have the demeanor of a commander of 100,000 soldiers. At this moment, Rong Xiao could only pray in his heart that no one would notice him. No one would discover him. Perhaps his prayers really worked. Surprisingly, those cavalry troops didn't enter his tent and just ran past him several hundred meters away. The outside quickly returned to silence and no one came into the tent. Rong Xiao patted his chest and got up from the table. Then he saw that everyone in the tent was like him, trembling on the ground. If it was only the dancers who were behaving like this, it could still be forgiven. After all, they were women, not soldiers, so he couldn't be too strict with them. However, the bodyguards who were protecting him were also behaving like this, which really made Rong Xiao furious. He couldn't help but shout loudly, "What are you all doing?" Chapter 1183. This shout scared the bodyguards who were kneeling on the ground. None of them dared to raise their heads. Rumble. Rong Xiao, who was about to stand up and teach those bodyguards a lesson, once again hid under the table. His body trembled once again. Rong Xiao was about to stand up and teach those bodyguards a lesson. However, the same thing happened again. The cavalry passed by the camp again and did not disturb them. When everything quieted down, Rong Xiao lifted his head from the desk and saw that the bodyguards were still in the same position. He was furious. Just as he was about to scold them, the cavalryman came again, forcing him to bury his head in his chest again. This repeated 3 times. It was the 1st Cavalry Division, the New Army, and the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Regiment that passed by. This scared Rong Xiao 3 times, but it also made him more courageous. Holding a sharp long sword in his hand, he stood up. He wanted to kill 1 or 2 of the bodyguards. He wanted to remind the others that he was the master. When there was danger, they should protect him and not just care about their own lives. Another rumbling sound rang out, but to Rong Xiao, who had already experienced it 3 times, it no longer had any effect of intimidating him. However, just when he thought that the cavalry would pass by safely, the footsteps outside the tent were getting closer and closer. Then the curtain of the tent was opened from the outside. The commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Lu Zhuo, walked in with a group of soldiers. They had also seen some tents here and had come to search them out of curiosity. As a new army that had guarded the city for several months and been trapped for more than a year, their combat strength had dropped a level due to the lack of nutrition. Yang Chendong took this into consideration and ordered them to stay and clean up the battlefield. It was the easiest job. The 1st Cavalry Division of the new army was in charge of capturing prisoners in this area. Originally, he thought that there would be no one in the tent since several cavalry units had passed by. However, he didn't expect to see more than 30 people when he entered the tent. One of them was even holding a sword and standing in the middle of the tent with an angry look on his face. "There is a tough guy here." Lu Zhuo sighed when he saw the person. As his voice fell, several bodyguards behind him rushed out and surrounded the person holding the sword. It seemed that if the other party dared to make a move, they would rush up and chop him into meat paste. The person holding the sword was Rong Xiao. He wanted to teach those bodyguards a lesson and then force them to protect him and leave here. He did not expect that there would be cavalry who noticed this place and rushed in. When he saw those bodyguards surrounding him, he was scared and threw his sword on the ground. Then he knelt on the ground and shouted, "Sir, please spare me." Ah! He turned out to be a coward. This dramatic scene stunned Lu Zhuo. "Yes, I am a coward." In order to survive, Rong Xiao, who was kneeling on the ground, forced himself to raise his head. He wanted to see who the other party was and whether they could be bribed. As long as they could let him live, he was willing to pay a lot of money. When he raised his head, he recognized Lu Zhuo. He immediately shouted, "Division Commander Lu, I am Rong Xiao. You don't know me? I used to do business with the city lord's mansion in the first city." If he did not shout like this, Lu Zhuo might not recognize him. If he was captured as an ordinary prisoner, he might have a chance to escape. But now his shout had completely exposed his identity. After Lu Zhuo heard the name Rong Xiao, he frowned and asked, "Are you the Biming merchant Rong Xiao?" Hearing Lu Zhuo call out his name and identity, Rong Xiao quickly raised his head and said, "Yes, Division Commander Lu, I am Rong Xiao. We have met before. I have even worked in the army." This time, Lu Zhuo looked carefully and recognized that the person in front of him was indeed Rong Xiao. He could not help but laugh and said, "Oh, it's really you. Come, get up quickly." As he spoke, he walked over and made a gesture of supporting him with both hands. Receiving such treatment, Rong Xiao's face was naturally filled with joy. He stood up with a smile on his face. But soon this smile froze on his face because the next moment, a heavy punch hit his lower abdomen. With just one punch, he vomited all the food that he had just eaten. Rong Xiao's name could be said to be well known in the beginning city. Unfortunately, it was not a good reputation but a bad reputation. It was this person who became Biming's lackey. He first persuaded Su Yuan and forced the entire new Second Army to surrender to Biming. For this matter, Commander Tiger's Mane had given a strict order that if one day they could catch Rong Xiao, they should not be polite to him. Lu Zhuo naturally remembered this in his heart. He thought that this person was still abusing his power in Shajing City. He never thought that he would meet him here. How could he be polite? Of course, he would teach him a lesson first. The miserable Rong Xiao was beaten up by Lu Zhuo on the spot. He knelt on the ground and vomited. He did not even have the strength to stand up. Lu Zhuo stopped and said to the soldiers beside him, "Come, lift him up and send him to Bugnam of Gojoseon for punishment." Without a leader, the 100,000 Biming army could not form an effective resistance. Even if some of the Biming army generals wanted to resist and make contributions, they could only resist for a few hours under the crazy attack of the 5-star army cavalry. In the end, they could not escape the fate of being surrounded and surrendered. Yang Qindong appeared at the gate of the first city with 1,000 black cavalry at noon. The first thing he saw was the captives of the Biming army and the money and supplies that they did not have time to transport when they escaped. "Young master, it's a big harvest." Beta Persei looked at all this with a grin. Yang Qindong was also in a good mood. He thought that with 70,000 Liaodong iron cavalry and 50,000 Walla elite cavalry, even if they won this battle, they would have to pay a certain price. He did not expect that Shiheng was so afraid of death that he escaped so quickly. This was naturally because of the previous strategies that worked, but it also had a lot to do with the incompetence of the commander of the Biming army. Young master." Not far away, a group of cavalry galloped over, and the shout could be heard clearly even though it was still far away. "It's Tiger's Head." Beta Persei had good eyesight and recognized the person who came. He was also excited. It had been more than 2 years since the last time they were separated. Anyone would be excited to see each other again. Especially Tiger's Mane, who came over on horseback, jumped off his horse when he was still more than 10 meters away from Yang Qindong and ran over. Facing this errand boy and servant who had accompanied him since he was a child, Yang Qindong was also filled with emotions, and his eyes involuntarily became gentle. "Young master, you're finally here." Tiger's Mane, who fell 10 feet in front of White Dragon, couldn't help but cry. "Quick, help Tiger's Head up." Yang Qindong couldn't stand to say this the most. He could see tens of thousands of soldiers fighting and even dying on the battlefield, but he just couldn't bear to see these men in tears. Beta Persei dismounted from his horse and helped Tiger's Mane, who was kneeling on the ground, up. Tiger's Mane, who seemed to have just calmed down, burst into tears again because of Yang Qindong's words. "You've worked hard." Unlike parting, Tiger's Mane was a person who would rather break than bend. He had even prepared to live and die with the first city. He also thought that he would never see the young master again in his life. At this time, seeing him again, one could imagine how excited he was. Young master, you're becoming more and more mature and charming, Tiger's Mane couldn't help but say after looking up and sizing up Yang Qindong. When he first entered the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty, Yang Qindong was only a young man who was less than 20 years old. But now he was nearly 30 years old and was a mature middle-aged man. Even the corners of his mouth had grown a beard. How could people not be moved? Ah, Tiger's Mane, your flattery skills have also improved. With Yang Qindong's laughter, the atmosphere at the scene suddenly became much more cheerful. After Tiger's Mane, Yang Si, Yu Mian, and the others came to greet him one by one. Yang Qindong gave each of them verbal encouragement, making them feel the warmth and importance of being close to them. After everyone greeted each other, they talked about the current situation of the battle. Tiger's Mane took the initiative to report, "Young master, except for more than 10,000 people who died or were injured in battle, the rest of the 100,000 Baiming army surrendered and were captured. Among them, the commander-in-chief, Rong Shao, was also captured alive by us. You can do whatever you want with him." Very good. Yang Qindong nodded happily. This battle is much smoother than I thought. Everyone has put in a lot of effort and should be rewarded. Hahaha. Everyone chuckled when they heard this. However, only one person had a straight face. When he saw that Yang Qindong seemed to be in a good mood, he suddenly stepped forward and said, "King, I don't want to be rewarded. I only request to participate in the hunting mission. Please allow it." The person who spoke was the commander of the new light cavalry, Ma Xianxia. It was obvious that he was still angry about being stopped by the Liaodong cavalry. This time he wanted to take revenge. When Ma Xianxia first met Yang Qindong, they were still at High Town. At that time he had shown his strength and questioned Yang Qindong's horsemanship. In the end, it ended with the white dragon being subdued. After not seeing each other for many years, the moment he opened his mouth, it was as if he was in a difficult position. Tiger's Mane, Yang Si, Yu Mian, and the others were all shocked and angrily rebuked him. Today Yang Qindong was no longer the Yang Qindong of High Town. He was now the Bugnam of Zhou. The territory he had was comparable to the Great Ming Dynasty, and the number of troops he had was enough to dominate the Great Ming Dynasty. How could he allow others to question the military plans he made? If Yang Qindong became angry and punished Ma Xianxia, no one would be able to say anything. Chapter 1184. Commander Ma, what are you doing? Hurry up and apologize to the king. Tiger's Mane was the first to speak. It was clear that he still cared for and valued this person. Commander Ma, hurry up and apologize. Yu Mian, Yang Si, and the others also spoke up. Lu Zhua and the others, who felt that they had lost face, also hurriedly winked at Ma Xianxia, reminding him within the appropriate range. Seeing that everyone was reprimanding him and showing concern for him, Ma Xianxia realized that he had caused trouble. Yang Qindong was not Tiger's Mane, who could voice out his opinions in person. He immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Yang Qindong. "King, please forgive this subordinate's reckless words. Young master, you see, Ma Xianxia's temper is like this. He speaks without thinking. In fact, he doesn't mean anything else, and he doesn't mean to question your decision. Please forgive his reckless behavior. Yes, Commander Ma is usually a good person. He is loyal and reliable and does things seriously. Yang Si is willing to vouch for him. He did not mean to be disrespectful." Yang Si also spoke up at this moment, and his knees went soft as he knelt on the ground. The originally happy and harmonious scene instantly became like this. Everyone didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Yang Qindong's expression did not change, but he lamented in his heart. In the past, he always heard people say that it was lonely at the top and that an emperor would not have any friends. He never believed it. However, everything that happened in front of him vividly taught him a lesson. It made him understand that now everyone was actively keeping a distance from him. This might be a show of respect. However, from now on, it would not be so easy for him to be friends with these people and hear some truth. Young master. Seeing that Yang Qindong did not speak for a long time and even his brother Yang Si was kneeling on the ground to plead for Ma Xianxia, Beta Persei finally could not hold it in anymore. He asked tentatively in a low voice with a pleading expression on his face. When Yang Qindong saw Beta Persei's reaction, he finally could not help but laugh out loud. He then pointed at the crowd and said, "What are you doing? What are you all doing? Do you really think that just because I, the young master, am in a higher position will become estranged? Commander Ma only gave a suggestion. He didn't do anything. Why should I punish him? Why don't you all get up? Yang Qindong said with a smile on his face. Obviously he was not angry. Tiger's man and the others let out a sigh of relief, but at the same time, they did not deliberately remind Ma Xiangshan to thank him. Ma Xiangshan was very clear that his actions just now were very uncomfortable. This time his apology was sincere. Your Majesty, it's all my fault. I didn't think before speaking. Thank you for your forgiveness. Well, it's not a big deal. Besides, Commander Ma gave a military suggestion. This is what a military officer should do. There's nothing wrong with it. Not to mention it's very reasonable. We sent too few cavalry to chase after them. Since the new army is made up of cavalry, of course they should perform better. Not only was Yang Qindong not angry, but he also took the initiative to say what everyone wanted to say. For a moment, everyone's eyes gathered on him again. According to the military action plan that Yang Qindong had previously set, considering that the new army had been fighting for so many days, once the battle started and they broke through the joint defense line of the Baiming army and the Walla army, what they had to do was to capture prisoners and clean up the battlefield. Relatively speaking, this task was the easiest and safest. It was also beneficial for the new army to quickly recover their strength. But now the Baiming army's front line was broken through so easily. This was really beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. Because of this, some changes could be made to the previous military plan. Noticing that everyone was looking at him with hopeful eyes, Yang Qindong asked seriously, after being besieged for so long and with the lack of food, are you sure that your strength hasn't declined and you can participate in the next tough battle? No problem. In just an instant, all the division-level generals of the new army spoke in unison. Ignoring everyone's answer, Yang Qindong's eyes fell on Tiger's mane. He wanted to hear his opinion. He didn't want to blindly agree because these people wanted to show off. Once there was a problem, it would be a big problem. Tiger's mane obviously understood what Yang Qindong meant. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then he raised his head and said, Young master, most of them don't have any problems. Although the siege seems dangerous as cavalry, they don't really have many opportunities to go up the city tower. In addition, Yangxi took out the stored food half a month ago. During this period of time, everyone's physical strength has been replenished. They can accept the mission of continuous battle. Well, you said that most of them don't have any problems. That means that some of them have problems. Tell me which divisions need to stay behind. Yang Qindong understood the hidden meaning in Tiger's mane's words. He also needed someone to stay behind to clean up the battlefield and look after the prisoners. He couldn't let the new army rush up at once. If that happened, what would happen to the safety of the beginning city? Yes, young master. I personally think that the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division should stay behind. The other divisions can join the battle immediately. Tiger's mane didn't even turn his head. He could even imagine that his subordinates would definitely look at him with hopeful gazes. However, it was good to want to render meritorious service. However, if they didn't have enough strength and forcefully stood out, it wouldn't be meritorious service but courting death. When he mentioned the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division, Lu Zhua and Deng Yu's expressions immediately became very ugly. However, they had nothing to say. Previously, when they were defending the city, the 70,000 soldiers that Yangxi had prepared couldn't hold on any longer. The two divisions even abandoned their horses and rushed up the city tower. Only then did they protect the city. Because of this, their losses weren't small. Now, it was most appropriate for them to stay behind to defend the city and look after the prisoners. After Tiger's mane finished speaking, no one objected. Yang Qindong knew that this should be a result that everyone could accept. He immediately said, very good. If that's the case, the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division will stay behind. Heavy Cavalry Regiment, listen to my orders. You are ordered to wander around Tulu City. If you find any Baiming army that wants to come out, fight them back. If there are too many enemy soldiers, you can return to the beginning city at any time to ask for reinforcements. Yes. The Heavy Cavalry Regiment's commander, Windchaser, immediately agreed excitedly. Light Cavalry Regiment and Reconnaissance Regiment rest for a while. After that you will set off with this king and kill your way to the Hanoi area. This time we will make the Wara pay the price. I want Yeshen's head. Yang Qindong's voice became louder and louder as he spoke. The two commanders Ma Xiangshan and Ding Shan immediately agreed loudly. As the war went surprisingly smoothly, Yang Qindong's vision was no longer limited to taking back the lost cities. Instead he wanted to make a crusade against his enemies and opponents. And this time his target was the leader of the Wara, Yeshen. Although Baiming was also an opponent, after all they had a deep foundation and were powerful. If he tangled with them now, he didn't know how many troops and time he would have to invest. This was not in line with Yang Qindong's current development goal. It was better to let go of the opponent first and clench his fists to deal with Yeshen first. Of course, if Baiming didn't know what was good for them and still came out to mess things up, then he didn't mind fighting a few more battles with them. The new army's military plan had been adjusted. Everyone went to prepare. Using these few hours of reorganization, Yang Qindong came to the big tent outside the city. He separately received the Far Eastern Army's commander Qin Bo, Maobei Division's commander Xin Honghai, Na Raizong, and the Mongolian generals who had joined the 5-star army. During the process of receiving them, Yang Qindong gave full recognition and praise to everyone's performance, making every general feel a sense of importance. When everyone walked out of the tent, their faces were full of satisfaction and excitement. Especially at the end when Yang Qindong sacrificed himself to analyze the situation for them, it made them have a clearer understanding of the next step and plan. For example, the Far Eastern Army's commander Qin Bo, Yang Qindong straightforwardly asked him to rush back to the Far Eastern province. The environment there was complicated and they couldn't lack the deterrence of the army. Of course, this time they didn't come in vain. After the supply line was opened, soon new supplies would be sent from the sea through the Liaodong region. This time when Qin Bo and the others returned, they could send a large number of logistical supplies back. This would play a very positive role in speeding up the development of the Far Eastern province. 6th young master, I will leave you a division. Next we will deal with Yeshen of the Wara. He is not an easy person to deal with. Of course, the more the better. I also want to let my soldiers see the true style of the 5-star army's cavalry. Qin Bo was in favor of withdrawing the army back to the Far Eastern province. Originally, this time he came here to launch a surprise attack and rescue the heavily injured Mo Bay City and Shur City. Now that the mission was completed, of course he had to go back. However, he still hoped to leave a division behind so that they could learn more from Yang Qindong. In the face of Qin Bo's request, Yang Qindong thought about it for a while and agreed. No matter what, he was still the commander of an army. Moreover, he stayed in that bitter cold place all year round. If he made a request, he would have to fulfill it. After Qin Bo left a division behind, Narisong was also allowed to bring 20,000 Mongolian cavalry to participate in the next battle. Yang Qindong only had one request for him, and that was to follow orders. Since those small Mongolian tribes wanted to have a share of the pie in the war, they must obey orders and follow orders. If they couldn't do this, then they should leave as soon as possible. Now Xianxia didn't have to rely on these small Mongolian tribes. Chapter 1185. Xianxia's continued growth and economic development, especially after defeating the Baiming army and the world of Wara, made the small Mongolian tribes see the rise of a powerful 5-star army, a new force. They could only look up to the 5-star army and didn't dare to have the slightest disrespect. After knowing that the order was personally given by Bugnam of Gojosian, no one dared to refuse. They all said that they would obey the military order, and some even directly said that they wanted to join the 5-star army. In their opinion, finding a strong backer would be more beneficial to their tribe's future development. For those who wanted to rely on him, Yang Qindong didn't have no choice but to accept all of them. He asked Yang Heir to investigate carefully and make sure that their strength could play a role before accepting them. On the contrary, some of the small tribe leaders who had their own plans were already dead in Yang Qindong's heart. For the future generations, he wouldn't allow other armed forces to exist under his rule. Even if they were to rely on him, he wouldn't allow them to join the 5-star army. He also had to disrupt their original organization, which meant that he had to completely eat them up. In the future, people who joined him and rebelled often happened, and it happened more than once. It also caused a lot of headaches for those who thought that they were broad-minded. Yang Qindong didn't want to make this kind of mistake again. Either they were completely used by the 5-star army, or they were completely destroyed. There was no third choice. Of course, this wasn't something that could be done just by saying it. If he wanted to do this, it would take a long time. What Yang Qindong needed to do was to shorten this process as much as possible and completely unify the entire Mongolian grassland. After meeting the generals and assigning them their respective tasks, the last person Yang Qindong met was the captured Baiming general, or more precisely the businessman, Rong Xiao. This businessman who used the commercial resources of the 5-star army and relied on his identity as a Han to make a fortune. Now he actually used the money he earned from the 5-star army to deal with the 5-star army. With this kind of two-faced character, Yang Qindong couldn't tolerate him. He had to kill him as an example to those who had bad intentions. Rong Xiao, who was tied up, was like a fat pig that was about to be slaughtered. He was tied to a piece of wood and carried into the tent. As he entered, a fishy stench spread throughout the tent. Beta Persei, who was standing on the side, wrinkled his nose, asked with an unhappy expression, "What's going on? Did you throw him into a cesspool?" Second brother, no, he was so scared that he peed and pooped. I just gave him a simple wash, but I didn't expect him to pee again. Longwei's captain Ba Daojiang, who was responsible for bringing him in, said with a face full of disdain, "You dare to make an enemy out of our 5-star army with just this little bit of ability?" Knowing that this was all because Rong Xiao was too cowardly, Yang Er snorted unhappily. Yang Qindong's expression was normal. In the past, in order to complete a mission, he had come into contact with all kinds of environments. It was just some strange smells, it really didn't make him feel any discomfort. He first looked at Rong Xiao, who had fainted from fright, and nodded. "Come, wake him up." Fush. A large bucket of cold water was then handed over to Rong Xiao. A wave of coldness directly stimulated him, causing him to struggle and shout loudly. Don't kill me, don't kill me, I'm willing to surrender to the 5-star army, I'm willing to serve the grandfathers of the 5-star army." Rong Xiao really didn't have a backbone. If it was said that he was tortured by Longwei for a period of time, he was already scared out of his wits at this moment, and he couldn't help but shout when he woke up. After shouting for a while, he found that no one was paying attention to him. Only then did he have the courage to open his eyes and look at the surroundings. He saw Bugnam of Gojoseon Yang Qindong sitting at the head of the tent wearing a golden robe. Bugnam of Gojoseon. Rong Xiao, who was once met by Yang Qindong because he was a businessman, immediately recognized Bugnam of Gojoseon's identity, and his eyes flashed with panic and surprise. Speaking of which, he felt sorry for Bugnam. Now that Bugnam of Gojoseon had found him, he was not afraid. But he believed even more that the king of hell was easy to meet, and the little devils were hard to deal with. Compared to those Longwei who used various means to deal with him, he believed that Yang Qindong should be easier to talk to, because people with such an identity would not take him seriously. As long as the other party was happy, he might be let go like a fart. Thinking of this, Rong Xiao, who was lying on the ground, suddenly got up and came to a place 5 meters in front of Yang Qindong at a fast speed. He kowtowed to the ground. "Bugnam of Gojoseon, I was wrong. Please be magnanimous and spare my life. I promise that the Rong family will completely obey your orders in the future and work for the 5-star army. I will be your dog in the future and I will bite whoever you ask me to. By the way, our Rong family has been doing business for generations and we have a lot of connections in Baiming. If you want to do something, we will definitely do it well and won't let you down. I only ask that you spare my life to show your magnanimity and magnanimity. I believe that many people will join you." Rong Xiao deserved to be a businessman. When he said these words, he didn't even stutter. It was as if these words had been rehearsed by him many times in his heart. The Rong family had indeed been doing business for generations. They had experienced being looked down upon by others at the beginning, and now they had a wide influence. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been conferred the title of general and could lead 100,000 soldiers just because they had done one thing. It was a good thing for the 5-star army and Yang Qindong to have such a congenial person. With them around, he would be able to gain a better understanding of the northern Ming dynasty. Or if it was another person, he would nod and agree. Unfortunately, he met Yang Qindong. It was because of Rong Xiao that the new Second Army had experienced a tragedy. Even among the captives in the Battle of the First City, many people who were originally from the new Second Army had been captured. Some of them had really betrayed Baiming while some of them hadn't. It was just that the environment had forced them to work hard for Baiming in order to survive. It was because of Xiao that the commander and the others had experienced a humiliation that they would never forget in their lives. This kind of approach was often more uncomfortable than killing them. If it weren't for Yang Qindong's enough trust in the commander, he and the entire new Second Army would not have a good ending. It was because of Xiao that the 100,000 people in Shajing City and Jingzhou City had not seen the sun for several months. The happy smile on their faces in the past had disappeared. Instead, they were living like walking corpses. No one wanted to experience the feeling of going from heaven to hell again. It was because of Xiao that the guard captain Wuxia had to die to show his loyalty. Such a loyal person who protected his master was killed by this villain in front of him. It was because of Xiao that the two cities had to temporarily rely on Baiming in order to survive. Because of this, Baiming and the War of Wara had no scruples and could besiege the first city. So many good soldiers had died tragically. It was because of Xiao. There were many more that Yang Qindong didn't want to say or think about. And all of this was because of Xiao's personal reasons. In the face of such a person who could be said to have committed a heinous crime, even if there was a flower in the sky, how could he forgive him? Compared to the benefits of getting along well with the Rong family, if Xiao didn't die, how many people would be disappointed? How could he face the heroes who died in the defense of the first city and the soldiers of the new Second Army? Xiao must die. This was the ending that no one could change, but he shouldn't die here but in Shajing City. It should be handled by Baiming and the others. Take him down and send him to the new Second Army. It's okay as long as he doesn't die in the process. These words had already represented Xiao's ending. There was even a hidden meaning in the words, that was, he would let everyone torture Xiao along the way as long as Xiao didn't die. It was best to let him suffer a fate worse than death, and let him know what would happen if he offended the 5-star army. It was almost time and Yang Qindong was ready to set off with the army. In contrast, the Wara had run for several hours. Although Tianhu and the others had already chased after them, they were alone and didn't bring enough money and food, so they couldn't be at ease. Order the new 1st Army Reconnaissance Regiment to be the left vanguard, responsible for the safety of the left wing. Order the new 1st Army Light Cavalry Regiment to be the right vanguard, responsible for the safety of the right wing. Order the 20,000 Mongolian troops led by Nari Song and the 1st Cavalry Division of the Far Eastern Army Daikwa to be the middle. Order the 4th Army Division to be the rear, escorting the army's money and food. Set off. In the big tent, Yang Qindong shook his arm and shouted. More than 50,000 troops went south from the first city. Looking at the back of the army, the new 1st Army commander Tiger's Mane was filled with emotion. The 5-star army has completely grown up. Yes, but our future mission is still a long way to go. Yu Mian, the lord of the first city, also sighed. Don't be emotional at this time. We still have too many things to do. Reorganizing the captive army and preparing to receive the new supplies, we still need the cooperation of the army commander and the lord of the first army. Yang Si chuckled, looking quite proud. It was no wonder that he was so happy. More than 70,000 Walla cavalry, more than 90,000 Baiming infantrymen, and nearly 70,000 infantrymen from Shirwanshan's headquarters. This was more than 200,000 troops, and now they all needed to be reorganized. This task mostly fell on him, the logistics division commander. Although the task was heavy, he was very happy. With so many troops, he could do a lot of things in the future. Don't worry, we will fully support you if you need anything. Yu Mian also said with a smile. But at the same time, he didn't forget to put forward a condition. It's just that the inner and outer walls of the first city have been damaged in this battle. With so many laborers, can Division Commander Yang Si help me? That's not a problem. We don't have anything else now, but we have people. Yang Si laughed. At this moment, not only him but Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian also laughed together. Chapter 1186. Compared to the joy of the new army, at this time Shi Heng was leading the army to strengthen the defense of Tulu City. In the battle outside the beginning city, the Baiming army was defeated and retreated. Xiao's 100,000 troops were all captured by the 5-star army. Not only that, he just received news that Shajing and Jingzhou City were once again controlled by the 5-star army's new second army and returned to the embrace of Bugnam of Gojosian. All kinds of unfavorable news came, and Shi Heng's face became very ugly. He already knew that this attack on the grasslands had ended in failure. He didn't dare to imagine what kind of reaction the emperor would have once he knew this news. What he had to do now was to mend the pen after the sheep were lost and find someone to take the blame. Shi Heng's earliest preparation was to let Sun Guang, who retreated first, take the blame. For this reason he also ordered Sun Guang, who retreated to Tulu City, to be arrested. Now he was in the dungeon's interrogation room. He hoped that he could use his words to persuade the other party to take all the blame. This way his responsibility as the commander would be reduced by a lot. In order to strengthen his power, Shi Heng also invited Fong Dingshan over. The two of them interrogated one person together, which was enough to give Sun Guang face. Bring people to commit the crime, Shi Heng said with some momentum as he slammed the wooden block on the desk. Bring people, commit. Ooh. The group of Yamen runners standing on both sides also shouted loudly, raising the tense atmosphere to the extreme. In the midst of the shouting, Sun Guang, shackled, walked into the hall under the protection of two bailiffs. Although he was still far away, the clattering sound could be heard. The shouts continued as if to create an extremely tense atmosphere. Shi Heng, who was sitting behind the desk, was already waiting to see Sun Guang's current appearance. Sun Guang's face would definitely turn pale, and he would kneel down and beg for mercy the moment he saw him. If that was the case, wouldn't Sun Guang have to say whatever he wanted him to say? The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. Sun Guang finally appeared, but he did not show the slightest sign of fear. Instead he looked lazy and sleepy. When he saw Shi Heng and Fong Dingshan, he even yawned and said with a smile, "Sai, even if I caught the wrong person, I shouldn't have let Marquis and General Fong come here personally. I'm really flattered." He did not seem to be afraid at all. On the contrary, he was so calm. In the eyes of Shi Heng and Fong Dingshan, they were surprised. The two of them first looked at each other. After confirming that the person who came was Sun Guang, Shi Heng suddenly picked up the wooden block and said, "Sun Guang, don't pretend to be crazy here. Marquis is asking you, do you know your crime?" The sound of the wooden block reverberated in the interrogation room. It was quite imposing. However, this was nothing to Sun Guang, who was like a hob. He could even laugh and said, "Crime? What crime have I committed?" "You." Shi Heng was really angered by Sun Guang's shameless behavior. He pointed at him and said, "You led the troops to retreat without a military order, which led to our defeat in the Battle of Beginning City. Isn't this enough to sentence you to death?" "What? Is there such a thing?" Sun Guang said with an obedient look. "What? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it? Deputy Commander Tsun, this is not what a man should do." Fong Dingshan, the deputy judge at the side, finally spoke. He could not stand the kind of generals who fled in the face of battle. They were obviously not very capable, but they were in a high position. Such people were like vermin and were really hateful. Facing Fong Dingshan's interrogation, Sun Guang was also not anxious. "General Fong, who are you talking about? From what I know, when faced with the charge of the 5-star army, you didn't even fire a single arrow before retreating. Could it be that your actions are what a man should do?" At this moment, Fong Dingshan's face flushed red. He was actually being questioned in return. He was not as thick-skinned as Sun Guang, who could be indifferent in the face of questioning. Although he was greedy for money, he also cherished his reputation. He immediately said angrily, "Bullshit. The reason why the Liaodong cavalry retreated was because Admiral Shi gave a military order. We followed the order and also to preserve the strength of our Baiming army. If that's the case, then I also retreated to preserve my strength." Sun Guang was good with words and directly used the other party's reason to explain his actions. "This is not the same," Fong Dingshan said angrily. "I retreated because I received the Admiral's order. You didn't. You think I didn't do it just because you said so? Ask Marquis, didn't you give me the order to retreat first?" Sun Guang ignored Fong Dingshan and looked at Shi Heng, who was sitting on the other side. "The situation is like this. When the Admiral saw that Rong Shao, who was the vanguard, didn't know how to command and fight, and was the first to escape, he relied on his many years of experience on the battlefield. In order to preserve more strength, he immediately gave the order for the entire army to retreat. It was under this order that our Great Tong Army and General Fong's Liaodong cavalry took the opportunity to retreat back to Tulu City. This sealed off the five-star army's entrance to Baiming, and at the same time preserved the strength of the army. In this battle, Marquis's command wasn't wrong. The mistake was Shi Wanshan's betrayal, the Wara's escape, and Rong Xiao's cowardice. This made the opportunity to severely damage the five-star army and even capture Bugnam of Gojozin go to waste. There was no mistake in the command and preparation of this battle. Marquis and General Feng, was that not the case? As if he was telling a story, Sun Guang's words were full of chapters and chapters as he narrated the entire story. Shi Heng and Fang Dingshan were stunned when they heard this. If they didn't experience it themselves, they would also think that this was what happened. Without waiting for the two to react, Sun Guang continued, "Of course, if the two of you insist that I am guilty, then there is another explanation. Admiral Shi didn't know how to maintain a good relationship between the two armies, so the Wara suddenly retreated at a critical moment. Admiral Shi and Fang Dingshan saw that the situation was going to change, so in order to protect their own lives, they forced Rong Xiao to lead 100,000 soldiers to their deaths. Only Vice General Sun Guang saw the problem, but because they had been besieging the city for many days, their strength was limited, so in order to preserve the strength of the army, they had no choice but to retreat first. Unfortunately, in order to cover up the truth, Admiral Shi killed all the witnesses and pushed all the blame to Sun Guang. In the blink of an eye, it was a completely different explanation. After saying this, Sun Guang intentionally shrugged and said, "Right, I've already written a memorial for the second explanation. As long as I don't leave this place today, someone will send it to Baiming. When the time comes, His Majesty will definitely see it. Perhaps he won't believe it, or perhaps he will. In that case, everything will be up to the heavens. Naturally, the choice is still in the hands of the two of you. Do as you see fit." At this moment, Sun Guang was extremely relaxed. He didn't seem like a criminal at all. On the contrary, he seemed more like an interrogator. The second explanation was like a heavy hammer to Shi Heng and Fang Dingshan's heads. The two of them couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Only now did they realize that they had somewhat underestimated this Sun Guang in the past. It turned out that this was a smart person. They didn't know that everything Sun Guang did was the idea given to him by Su Dei. And this idea came from Yang Chendong. No wonder Shi Heng and Fang Dingshan were stunned. In this battle, Su Dei originally wanted to take the opportunity to return to the embrace of the five-star army. He was even confident that he could capture Sun Guang and make a great contribution. However, this was not what Yang Chendong wanted. A good-for-nothing general like Sun Guang would not be an obstacle to Yang Chendong's unification of the world. On the contrary, having such a person Baiming would only be beneficial and not harmful to him. Once he captured him, not only would he not be able to severely damage the strength of the Baiming army, but he would also help the other party to eliminate villains. Why would Yang Chendong do that? As for Su Dei, he played an unparalleled role in the battle outside the beginning city. It was better for such a person to continue to stay in the Baiming army. At least now was not the time for him to come to the five-star army. Of course, Yang Chendong would remember all these contributions in his heart. Once he returned one day, he would definitely give them a position that he was satisfied with. Having said that, Sun Guang's two statements entered the ears of the two generals. As long as one was not stupid, one would naturally know how to choose. Although there was a hint of being threatened, whether it was Shi Heng or Fang Dingshan, they were the kind of people who cared about their reputation. They absolutely did not want to have a scandal, let alone lose the imperial favor. In the end, the two looked at each other and laughed. Then Shi Heng said, "Deputy Commander Tsun is indeed a pillar of the country. It seems that everything is really a misunderstanding. Come quickly remove the shackles." Sun Guang was released just like that. The explanation to the outside world was that his withdrawal was originally approved by the admiral. It was just that he withdrew too quickly, so it caused a misunderstanding. Following that, Sun Guang's first statement was written into a memorial to the emperor and reported to the Daizong emperor. The 50,000 cavalrymen of Walla were like a black whirlwind on the grassland, heading straight toward Shajing city. At the most critical moment, Yeshen was the first to withdraw his troops. He did not dare to gamble. He did not dare to believe in his ally, the Baiming army, which led to a great defeat outside the beginning city. Of course, the Baiming army was defeated. They lost 100,000 troops. For Yeshen, it was just some provisions that could not be taken away because he was in a hurry. When he returned to Hanoi and gathered his general, Bo Muir, Provisions would not be a problem. Leader, the fast horse scouts reported that the 5-star army is still chasing us 50 miles behind us. They have not given up. General Chao Lu rode to Yeshen's side and reported in a hurry. Chapter 1187. They're still chasing? How many people do they have? Yeshen's face flashed with anger. He had already been defeated, but he was still the first army to retreat. This was giving enough face to the 5-star army. Moreover, when he attacked the beginning city, he didn't use a single soldier, saber or sword. On the contrary, he even lost 100,000 soldiers when he attacked North Desert City. No matter how he looked at it, he was the one who suffered a loss. Why was the 5-star army so tightly holding on to him and not letting him go? Replying to the leader, they have about 50,000 people. They have more people than us. Among them, there is also the existence of the most elite existence like the 1st Cavalry Division. When Chao Lu answered these questions, he felt a chill down his spine. Unlike Baiming and Southern Ming, where most of the soldiers were infantry, the 1st Cavalry Division was in the limelight in the grasslands where the majority of the soldiers were cavalry. It was not something that other tribes and forces could compare to. A person's name was like a tree's shadow. For many people in the grasslands, the 1st Cavalry Division represented a destructive existence. Continue to retreat. When he heard that the other side had more people than him, and that there was the existence of the invincible elite existence like the 1st Cavalry Division, Xianxia lost the desire to compete. He helplessly shook his head and gave the order to continue the retreat. Reporting. Just as Xianxia gave the order, the fast horse scout in front of him came in front of him again. Reporting to the leader, there is a group of cavalry with the banner of the 5-star army 30 miles in front of us. They are blocking our way. There is a 5-star army cavalry in front of us? Xianxia was shocked by this news. Leader, it should be the 5-star army's new 2nd army. Chao Lu thought of something and whispered to Xianxia. Slapping his forehead, Xianxia nodded. That's right, it should be them. The useless Baiming. After conquering 2 cities, don't they know how to completely destroy the new 2nd army? Now they've become popular again. Yes, the Baiming army is too incompetent. But chief, now that they are targeting us, what should we do? Chao Lu was also complaining about the incompetence of the Baiming army, but now was not the time to complain. Instead, he had to face the problem. What else can we do? Let's split up and meet the enemy. The rest of the cavalry will circle around them and rush back to Hanoi. Helplessly he said. In the past, if a mere new 2nd army dared to stop 50,000 elite cavalrymen from Wara, Xianxia would definitely teach them a lesson. But now he couldn't take such a risk. Once his main force was entangled with the enemy, the 5-star army cavalry would catch up to him. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to escape even if he wanted to. This was to strengthen the soil and break the wrist. Chao Lu asked carefully, Chief, how many people should we send to meet the enemy? Everyone knew that the cavalrymen sent to meet the new 2nd army would never return. But the number of people was the key. If there were too few, it wouldn't be effective. If there were too many, the losses would be too great. It was not a good choice. Send 20,000 soldiers. After all, the new 2nd army's strength is greatly damaged. If we send more people, they might be able to rush out and meet up with us in Hanoi. Xianxia was indeed an ambitious person. Without even thinking about it, he betrayed all 20,000 of his men. The so-called sending more people to defeat the new 2nd army was just an excuse. In the end, Xianxia was afraid that if he sent too few people, they wouldn't be able to entangle the new 2nd army and effect his escape plan. Chao Lu was naturally aware of this point. But this was the chief's order, so he had to carry it out. He immediately agreed and went to make the arrangements. We'll leave from the sides. Xianxia said with heartache. When they came with 150,000 soldiers. But when they returned, they only had 30,000 men and horses. They even lost their provisions. This was an undeniable defeat. In front of the small yellow river in front of Shajing City, the new 2nd army was laying in ambush here, waiting for the Wara cavalrymen to escape here. They wanted to take advantage of the situation and kill them. Report. General, the Wara cavalry has split up. 30,000 of them left from the flanks. About 20,000 of them are heading straight for us. The scout in charge of scouting turned back and reported to the general standing in front of the army. Understood. Shbai nodded with a solemn expression. Obviously, this situation was completely within his expectations. The enemy has split up, so the pressure on us has decreased a lot. Now we're only dealing with 20,000 cavalrymen. Everyone must cheer up and show the might of the new Second Army. Yes. Kang Ji and the other 2 division commanders replied loudly. In fact, even if there were 20,000 Walla cavalry, it would still be a huge pressure for the new Second Army. After going through so many things, the new Second Army was now short of an infantry division, and the other 3 divisions were not complete. At most there were only 18,000 soldiers. Moreover, the number of horses in the army was not enough. Many of the original cavalrymen had to be converted to infantry because of the lack of horses. Kang Ji looked at his subordinates who were supposed to have more than 8,000 cavalrymen, but now there were only about 4,000 cavalrymen and 2,000 infantry. He couldn't help but curse. It's all because of those damn Baiming. They stole our horses. Otherwise, with the strength of the new Second Army, it would be easy to deal with 20,000 cavalrymen. Okay, Mr. Kong, don't complain. Save some strength to deal with the enemy. Go and check on the preparation of the bows and arrows. She understood Kang Ji's frustration. How could he not be the same? However, this was a war. It was not a war where 2 people could curse each other. It was not a war where one could win by talking. Although Su Yuan betrayed the 5-star army and ended up with his corpse, he still did some good things. For example, a large number of military supplies were stored in Shajing City. Among them, bows and caltrops were the most abundant. Considering that the most likely enemy on the grassland was the cavalrymen, the Baiming army was well prepared. Because the Baiming army was mainly attacking the beginning city this time, many of the equipment that was used to deal with the cavalrymen were temporarily not used. They were left in the city. This time the new Second Army benefited. Commander, don't worry. The bows and arrows are ready. We also prepared 400 meters of caltrops. I guarantee that the enemy's cavalrymen will suffer heavy losses. Kang Ji's face was full of confidence when he said this. Good. This is a turnaround for the 5-star army. Although we were forced to do what we did before, it is inevitable that some of our brothers will have some opinions about us. Now is the time to prove everything with actions. There must not be any problems. She nodded heavily and said. Now everything was ready. They only lacked the east wind. 4 hours later, the east wind, which was the enemy, appeared. Looking from afar, it was as if they covered the sky and the earth. People said that there were more than 10,000 soldiers. When 20,000 cavalrymen came from afar, the battle formation could not be described with words. Prepare for battle. Archers, get ready. Kang Ji, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, rode on his horse and shouted loudly. There were 6,000 archers in the 3 divisions. They were waiting for the enemy to arrive at the designated location so that they could launch a fatal attack. The earth shook and shouts shook the sky. 20,000 elite cavalrymen of the Walla Empire came from afar, shouting slogans that only the people of the grassland could understand. When the distance between them was still 800 meters, they began to perform all kinds of equestrian tactical movements. They either hit their bodies on the side of the warhorse, or bent their bodies over the horse to minimize the area of their exposed body parts. Or they knocked their bows and arrows and prepared to launch a counterattack on the horse. This was an evenly matched battle. There were no tricks to be played. The reason why it was said to be evenly matched was because the Walla cavalry had the advantage in terms of numbers. It was just that they had limited time to fight. If it wasn't for the fact that the elite cavalry of the 5-star army were rushing over, the 20,000 Walla cavalry would not have used such a method of charging. Instead, they would have attacked from the left, middle and right. Only then would they be able to maximize their advantage in numbers. However, time did not allow for it. They had no choice but to use the wolf pack tactic. The so-called wolf pack tactic could also be called a swarm. It was like a pack of wolves. Once they saw the target, they would tear it into pieces and finally complete the mission of killing and defeating the enemy. It could be said that the ancient cavalry battles were very dangerous. It was about the coordination of tactics, the advantage in numbers, and the use of geographical and weather conditions. Of course, the morale of the 2 armies and the weapons used would also directly affect the final result of the battle. As for the battle between the 2 armies, it was almost impossible for both sides to fight. Unless it was under special circumstances, neither side would choose to do so. It was very difficult to train a general. It required a lot of resources and time. How could they sacrifice themselves in a battle like this? This was just something that movies and TV dramas did on purpose. The 20,000 Walla army's cavalrymen were approaching step by step, and their speed was very fast. Their forces were also very scattered. It gave people a feeling that they did not know where to start. It was as if the attack was not the main point and the attack was the main point. This was the essence of the wolf pack tactic. It made the opponent confused and could only choose to attack. In this way, if they did not deal with it well, they could be defeated like a mountain. The reason why the Walla cavalry chose to attack like this was because they had the advantage in numbers. They were thinking of ways to expand their advantage and achieve the military goal of winning the battle. Archers scatter. 300 in a squadron, 100 in a small squad. Adopt a stacked attack. Kongji was not someone to be trifled with. Seeing that the opponent was about to expand their advantage in numbers, he was not willing to let it go. He immediately adopted the corresponding countermeasures. Chapter 1188. After the order was given, the 6,000 archers were divided into 20 formations. Each formation had 300 archers and 100 archers would fire at the same time. After the first row fired their arrows, the second row, then the third row, and the first row readied themselves. The cycle repeated itself to achieve the goal of constantly firing arrows. By the time the archers' formation had completely dispersed, the Wa-Al cavalry was less than 5 li away. At this moment, Shibi's eyes were wide open as he looked forward. He wanted to see the iron caltrops display their might. Charge! Kill these lambs! Ha! The battle cries were still coming from all directions. The distance between the two groups increased from 500 meters to 450 meters, then 430 meters, 410 meters, 400 meters. Finally, they arrived at the battlefield of the iron caltrops. The sound of horses falling to the ground could be heard. The caltrops had 6 horns, so they could stand upright no matter where they were thrown. They were also very sharp. Once the caltrops hit a horse's foot, it could be pierced through even if the horse was hit by an iron palm. This was the advantage and power of the caltrops. The Walla cavalry did not expect the new Second Army to use this tactic. In their opinion, this attack was simply a rash move by the new Second Army. They shouldn't have made more preparations. Otherwise, they wouldn't have adopted the tactic of charging at the beginning. At least they should have sent some people to test the waters first. They did not expect the Walla cavalry to be hit by the caltrops. None of the Walla cavalry in the front could dodge the caltrops. A short distance of 100 meters was enough to knock down 2,000 Walla cavalry. The momentum of their charge was also halted. The caltrops were limited. In the era when iron was precious, the caltrops were very expensive. Even Baiming did not prepare a lot of them. The caltrops could only cover a distance of 100 meters. After this distance, the Walla cavalry adjusted their posture and started to charge again. When they were about 200 meters ahead and had just picked up their speed, the arrows came from afar. Like a dense rain of attacks, Division Commander Kong Ji gave the order to release the word fire. Ding ding dang dang dang. The arrows flew through the air for over 100 meters before landing on the bodies of the cavalrymen or their war horses. In an instant, there was another scene of men and horses being thrown off their feet. At least 1,000 cavalrymen fell to the ground from the arrows. Cavalry, get ready. Seeing that the 2 waves of preparation had the effect of injuring and obstructing the enemy, Kong Ji's heroic spirit soared. After a shout, he pulled out the sharp saber on his body. Tip of the arrow, charge at the enemy formation. Archers use protective fire. Charge. Kong Ji, who was issuing military orders, was the first to rush out of the battle formation. This also meant that the new Second Army's counterattack had officially begun. Relying on the caltrops and archers to obstruct the enemy, they effectively suppressed the Walla cavalry's advance. Kong Ji gave the order to launch an all-out attack. It could be said that he grasped the timing very well. Seeing all this, Songbi nodded in satisfaction. Songbi clenched his fists tightly because he knew that what happened just now was just a small trick. The real battle and bitter battle had just begun. In a chaotic battle like this, there were very few true winners. The only difference was which side would suffer less losses. Songbi clenched his fists tightly. His face was tense. In a battle like this, being a bystander was far less relaxing than slaughtering his way into the battle. At the very least, he didn't have to think so much when he entered the battlefield. All he had to do was to continuously kill the enemy and prevent himself from being killed. However, Yang Qindong had already set the rules for the 5-star army. In such a chaotic battle, the high-ranking officers were not allowed to participate personally. This time, Kang Ji was able to personally participate because the morale of the new Second Army had suffered a huge blow. Now that they urgently needed a leader, Commander Kang Ji rushed out. Otherwise, even he would have to stand outside the battlefield and watch everything from a bystander's point of view. The cruel battle had begun. Weapons clashed against weapons, warhorses clashed against warhorses, and humans clashed against each other. From time to time, there would be arrows falling into the battlefield. At this moment, no one could guarantee that the arrows wouldn't kill the enemy and harm the soldiers. At most, the probability of it happening would be lower. Therefore, on the battlefield there were many cavalrymen who died in the hands of their own archers. However, this didn't stop the archers from continuing to shoot arrows. After all, even if the arrows were used as support, the number of arrows would still be higher. This was a battle where there were no winners. In a chaotic battle, individual strength played a huge role. Luck also played a huge role in winning and losing. For example, many cavalrymen who went berserk would hurt their own soldiers from time to time. In such a chaotic battle, even if you had the ability to fight against 100 people, you might not be able to escape death. Unless it was a high-ranking officer like Kang Ji, there would be dozens or even hundreds of soldiers following him wherever he went. At least they could provide some protection. War was cruel. The cavalrymen fought back and forth. From time to time, there would be people who were knocked off their war horses. However, this didn't mean that they lost their ability to fight. On the contrary, there were more and more people who dismounted to fight. This made it so that sometimes, not only did they have to guard against being on horseback, they also had to guard against ambushes from below. Perhaps when they were swinging their swords at the enemy, the war horse's hooves would be chopped off. Then they would lose their balance and fall off the horse. If they weren't prepared, perhaps the moment they fell off the horse, there would already be a large sword floating above their head. And it was precisely this kind of chaotic battle that lasted for nearly an hour. In the end, there was no clear winner. Finally, it was announced that the Walla cavalry had left. Worried that the 5-star army behind them would catch up, the 20,000 Walla cavalry didn't make any more moves. They only charged blindly. After charging through the new Second Army's defensive line, they left. As for those who didn't charge through, they were either killed or taken captive. 2 hours later, both sides had paid a heavy price and the battle was coming to an end. Kang Ji, who was covered in blood, whether it was his own or the enemy's, rode to Xibei. He first gave a standard military salute and then said with a smile, "Military commander, the battle is over. According to the preliminary statistics, we killed more than 4,000 enemies and captured more than 10,000 enemies. Only 5,000 of the enemy's cavalry managed to escape. We lost more than 2,000 people and 5,000 injured." After saying this, Kang Ji's left arm suddenly bled a lot. This was the mark left by the Walla cavalry's scimitar. "Haha, I wasn't paying attention and was stared at by mosquitoes." Regarding this, Kang Ji said with a look of indifference, "Good, this battle was very good. We showed the spirit of our new Second Army. Come, bandage Mr. Kang's wound. Everyone else, clean up the battlefield." Seeing that the blood was still flowing and didn't seem to have any intention of stopping, Shibi hurriedly shouted. Kang Ji went to rest, leaving behind many soldiers to clean up the battlefield. About an hour later, a large number of 5-star army cavalry came from the distance. Among them, the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division were at the front. As the division commander, Tian, who took the lead and led a group of people to the front. When he saw the mess on the battlefield, the corpses that littered the ground and the blood that dyed the plains red, he could not help but nod his head. He could feel that the new Second Army must have used all their strength in this battle. "General Tian, thank you for your hard work." Shibi led a group of officers of the new Second Army to welcome him. "Commander Shibi, thank you for your hard work. There must have been a lot of casualties in this battle." Tian, who immediately saluted and then asked with a look of concern. Everyone knew that the new Second Army had just gone through an unforeseen event. Originally, the organization wasn't complete. Now that they had to fight such a fierce battle, It was already very difficult for them. Fortunately, our new second army isn't made of mud. We can hold on. Division Commander Kong Ji was afraid that the new second army would be looked down upon by others, so he took the initiative to stand up and answer. Sigh. However, Shibi waved his hand at Kong Ji and said to Tian Hu, General Tian, this is the division commander of the new Second Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Kong Ji. He's a bit straightforward. If he said anything that offended you, please don't take it to heart. The reason why he called Tian Hu general instead of division commander was that he was a major general. This was not something that an ordinary division commander could compare to. In fact, compared to his position in Bugnam of Gojoseon's heart, he was probably even lower than an ordinary division commander. Shibi was able to become the commander of the new Second Army in a way that came later not only because his ability to command the army was good, but also because his EQ was very high. This could be seen from this conversation. Oh, it's Mr. Kong. Sorry for the disrespect. Tian Hu smiled indifferently. Then he looked at Shibi and said, I, Tian Hu, am not that petty. We are all comrades, so I won't take it to heart. And I really admire the new Second Army. At least, if it were our 1st Cavalry Division, we wouldn't be able to do it no matter what. Tian Hu's words were not meant to belittle them. They were all from the bottom of his heart. Yang Chendong said that the 1st Cavalry Division was the strongest cavalry brigade. They were an existence that would rather break than bend. In their division there were only soldiers who died in battle. There were no kneeling captives. This was also their characteristic. Haha, General Tian is really praising us. We were also forced to do it. When talking about the past, there was a trace of shame on Shibi's face. No matter what, it's good to be able to persevere and hold on. How about this? We also seized 5,000 warhorses during the Battle of the First City. Now we will give them to the new Second Army. Take it as the 1st Cavalry Division's sponsorship to our brother's army. Please accept it, Commander Shibi. Tian Hu also laughed and then gave a generous gift. At this moment he was hurrying on his way to the battlefield as he called the 5 commanders over to assign them combat missions. When we march, we must put the scouts further away. Do you remember how we were ambushed by the 6th young master? At that time it was all thanks to the 6th young master showing mercy. Otherwise, our 1st Cavalry Division's reputation would have been tarnished. Therefore, I want to tell everyone that there's always someone better than you. Any actions or thoughts that look down on your opponents are unacceptable. If anyone dares to have such thoughts, then get out of the 1st Cavalry Division. We don't accept people who are arrogant and have no ability. When he said this, Tian Hu's face was solemn and he was very serious. This was also a problem that he had just discovered. When he was in Shajing City facing the new Second Army, which had a history of repeated failures, his soldiers showed a sense of superiority. They didn't pay attention to others when they spoke, and some of them didn't even talk to others. This made the officers of the new Second Army feel very embarrassed. But from beginning to end, the commander-in-chief had never once complained to him. Just because others didn't complain didn't mean that it didn't happen. At that time, Tian Hu considered that this was an internal matter of his division, so he didn't say anything. Now that he finally had the chance, he couldn't hold back and vented his anger to the 5 regimental commanders. Don't think that you're the best in the world. What did we rely on to have our current achievements? It's our comrade-in-arms, the 6th young master, who gave us preferential policies. Think about it. When did we not choose first when there were good soldiers? When there were good equipment, we didn't use it first. When there were good horses, we didn't choose first. Even if there were good food and drinks, we were the first to choose first. With this kind of full protection, even if we didn't do it, there would still be others who would do it, and they might even do it well. Therefore, everything that we have now has absolutely nothing to do with our own efforts. Do you understand? Regimental commanders, go back and check yourselves. When you rest during the march, you'll start criticizing and self-criticizing activities. If there's anyone who doesn't have a deep enough understanding, you'll have to help them understand. If they don't change, they'll be kicked out of our 1st Cavalry Division. Alright, there's no room for discussion on this matter. You can organize yourselves. However, I'm going to do a spot check to see which regimental commanders didn't do well. I won't find trouble with the battalion commanders, company commanders, platoon commanders, squad leaders, or soldiers. I'll only find you regimental commanders. If you don't meet the standards, I'll consider requesting the 6th young master to transfer you out of the 1st Cavalry Division after the war. His words were ruthless. Directly transferring out of the 1st Cavalry Division was tantamount to cutting off his future path of advancement and hope. The regimental commanders who originally didn't care much about it immediately became more serious. Especially the 1st Regiment Commander Taimu and the 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo. They were both uncouth men who didn't care much about this kind of ideological education. Just now, they were thinking of going through the process to get away with it. But now they didn't dare to have such thoughts anymore. Everyone knew that if they were really kicked out of the 1st Cavalry Division because of this matter, they wouldn't have the face to see anyone. Even with their contributions, if they were to go to other divisions, it would be difficult for them to raise their heads. In this meeting, Tian Hu was just expressing his thoughts. However, he didn't know how important this meeting was to the future development of the 1st Cavalry Division. This was equivalent to making up for their biggest shortcoming. When courage and carefulness were combined, when courage and modesty were combined, when powerful combat strength and a strong heart complemented each other, they would become the most difficult opponent to defeat. During the Ming Dynasty, Ili Belli was a part of the Chagatai Khanate of the Yuan Dynasty. Crooked Thoughts became its first king. He moved his people west to the Ili River Valley, which is the current Yining region of Xinjiang, and changed the name to Ili Belli. Ili was another transliteration of Ili, and Belli referred to Bali. In 1432 AD, Crooked Thoughts died and his descendants fought for the throne. The country split into Ili Belli, Yarqiang and Turfan. One of the descendants still used the name of Ili Belli, and became a subordinate country of the Ming Dynasty. Yarqiang was south of Tian Shan, east of Tsong Mountains and west of Boston Lake. The other was centered around Turfan. Ili Banli King Bao lied. The thing he wanted to do the most in his life was to reunite Ili Banli and bring the legacy of his ancestors to greater heights. For this, he did not hesitate to lower his head to the Ming Dynasty and even used Alpu to develop and strengthen himself. In history, Alpu did well, helping King Bao Li make Ili Belli strong, and he became the leader of the three. Even after he grew old, Ili Belli lasted for dozens of years before dying. However, in this life, Xianxia's sudden rise, especially the rapid development of the five-star army, changed the original history. Especially after the battle with the five-star army, Ili Belli had lost a lot of soldiers and generals, and their strength had been greatly reduced. 80,000 of the original 230,000 troops had been eaten, and now there were only 150,000 left. Even though during this period of time under Alpu's hard work he had recruited 50,000 new troops, and the size of the army had reached 200,000. However, compared to before, it was not as strong as before, and it attracted the attention of Yarqiang and Turfan. This made King Bao Li sigh as he was getting further and further away from his life goal. When it rains, it pours. On this night, it was raining heavily outside the palace. Hurried footsteps could be heard coming from the depths of the palace. A bolt of lightning flashed and illuminated the figure of this person. Who else could it be but Prime Minister Alipu? The person who came was Alipu. He had just received the intel from the scouts, and he was urgently looking for the king to discuss matters. King Bao Li, who had already rested, was woken up by the servants. He changed into his king attire and saw Alipu in the small hall. When he saw the intel that was sent over, his brows furrowed, showing the anxiety and uneasiness in his heart. Regarding the Wara sending troops to Shur City and working with the Baiming army to deal with the five-star army, King Bao Li had known about it long ago. He had always been conflicted about this matter. As far as he was concerned, whether it was the five-star army or the Wara, they were not easy to deal with. As such, no matter who won or lost, it would not be a good thing for him. If either side expanded, they could threaten him at any time. Unless the Baiming army won, this was a powerful but unambitious country. As long as they submitted to them in name, they would be able to live freely and do what they wanted to do. Because of this, he had asked Alipu about the Baiming army's chances of winning. Alipu's answer was less than 20%. He also said that even if the Baiming army won, it would be difficult for them to expand. After all, the Great Ming Dynasty was not just the Baiming army, but there was also the Southern Ming Dynasty. Dealing with internal problems was the most important thing for them to do. This answer was not what Bao Li wanted to hear. However, since they were small and weak, even if they did not like it, they could only wait for the final victor to appear. They could only hope that no matter who won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. This would give them more time to develop. Now the results were finally out. The 5-star army had won and the Walla army had fled towards their base in Hanoi. Chapter 1190. King Bao Lied didn't expect this. What he didn't expect was that the 5-star army actually chased after them for thousands of miles without any intention of stopping. This naturally caught his attention. The Han people had a saying, "Without the lips, the teeth will feel cold." Hanoi was too close to Ely. If they really fought their way here, they would unknowingly become a threat to their borders. If that really happened, the 5-star army would probably attack them. If that was really the case, they had to prepare in advance. Apu appeared here to talk about this matter. He looked at Bao Lied with a worried expression and said, "Your Majesty, the 5-star army's way of doing things is quite similar to our ancestors. They really pull out their swords at the slightest disagreement. We have to be careful." Normally, the most important thing between countries was politics. When there was no way to make peace, only when things escalated to the extreme would there be war. This was also the norm when countries interacted with each other. Usually they would scold each other, but they wouldn't easily send out their troops. That would be a sign of wasting people's money and causing the economy to deteriorate. Everyone understood this principle. However, it was still broken by someone. Just like the Mongolian Empire, they didn't reason with anyone. They just attacked. Often, when countries were still waiting for diplomatic communication, the Mongolian cavalry had already killed their way into the city. This was also one of the reasons why the Mongolian Empire was able to occupy so much territory in such a short period of time. After all, many people couldn't understand the way they attacked without saying anything. In comparison, the 5-star army was very similar. They also sent out their troops without saying anything. The only difference was that they had a good reason to send out their troops. Moreover, they treated the people in the occupied land very well. They also put in a lot of effort to develop the local economy. This was also why the backline was generally very stable and didn't have any major problems. However, no matter how good the 5-star army treated the people in the occupied land, it didn't mean anything to a king like Bao Lied. People like him cared more about the royal and imperial power. As long as the people were able to live, it didn't matter. With an ugly expression, Bao Lied put down the information, looked up at a lip and asked, "Xianxia, do you think that if the 5-star army defeats Yeshen, they will attack us? Judging from their past habits, it's very likely." Who told us to be weak? Apu didn't want to say this, but it was the truth. Their territory was small and their population was small. It was undoubtedly difficult for them to develop greatly in this limited environment. Even though he worked late into the night every day, he was still unable to completely turn the situation around. People said that horses galloped when they were flushed with success, but they did not know that flushed with success could cause horses to stumble. While Zhu Xian was hosting a banquet for the officials, a young eunuch came to the side of the main hall with a flustered expression. He then winked at Jin Ying, the head eunuch who was standing next to the emperor. Jin Ying was serving the emperor, pouring wine for him. From time to time she would tell a few jokes to amuse the emperor. He suddenly noticed the young eunuch's abnormal behavior and was very angry. He had already decided that if it was not something important, he would punish this young eunuch later. This young eunuch was too blind. Taking advantage of the fact that the emperor was watching the dance and was not paying attention to her, Jin Ying walked to the side of the hall and said to the young eunuch, "Speak, what is it? I'll tell you. If it is not something important, you little monkey can wait to be beaten." The young eunuch did not care about Jin Ying's threat at all. With a nervous expression and a trembling voice he said, "Chief eunuch, things are not good. Admiral Shi Heng's army has been defeated. They have now retreated to Tulu City. This is the memorial they submitted. It was sent here at the speed of 800 miles. What? Even though Jin Ying had served several emperors and claimed to be experienced and knowledgeable, his expression changed greatly. He had not expected things to turn out like this. Didn't the memorial say that the beginning city could not hold on and was about to be taken? How could there be a turn so quickly and such a huge change at that? Jin Ying didn't quite believe it. She took the urgent document and read it carefully. And when he saw it, he almost fell to the ground. Looking at the contents, it was even worse than the young eunuch's. Jin Ying wanted to calm down, but he found that he could not. He could only walk toward the throne room with heavy feet. At that moment he did not know that his expression was frighteningly ugly. Cold sweat was even running down his neck. Daizong was so happy that he didn't notice any of this. His gaze was still on the dancers. When Jin Ying came close to him and handed him the memorial, he casually pushed it away. "What time is this? I won't look at the memorial first. Let's talk about it later." Your Majesty, you should look at it now," Jin Ying said with difficulty. Jin Ying braced herself as she spoke. A eunuch actually dared to disobey the emperor's orders. That was a capital offense. But at that moment he had no other choice. He knew that if he really suppressed this memorial, it would be time to punish him. Jin Ying had actually disobeyed an edict. This finally attracted Daizong's attention. He saw that the hands that were handing over the memorial were trembling. Suddenly he had a bad feeling. With a solemn expression he reached out and took the memorial. Then he flipped through it. After about 10 breaths he suddenly roared in anger. "Trash, a bunch of trash." The sudden rage of the emperor caused the originally peaceful main hall to fall into silence. The musicians stopped playing. The dancers were also trembling in fear. They stood in a corner of the hall not knowing what to do. "Leave, all of you, leave." Jin Ying took the opportunity to wave his hand at the musicians and dancers. The main hall returned to silence. Then all the officials focused their gazes on the acting emperor, Zhou Xian, whose face was red from holding back his anger. No one knew what had happened to make the emperor so angry. "Here, let them take a look." After a pin-drop silence in the main hall, Zhou Xian finally reacted. He took the memorial and threw it to Jin Ying, who was standing at the side with his back hunched. "Your subject obeys." Jin Ying agreed. Then he took the memorial and walked down the hall. He handed it to Su Yozhen, who was standing at the first position on the left. Su Yozhen reached out to take it. He opened it and read it. Then he sucked in a breath of cold air. After 2 breaths of silence, he handed the memorial to the other important officials. Shurheng was defeated. The 5-star army won again. Not only did they solve the siege of Beginning City, but they also launched a fierce counterattack. When it rains, it pours. Even Shajing and Jingzhou City, which had previously submitted to Baiming, rebelled. They were returned to the 5-star army. This meant that the long period of planning was all for naught. So much effort and money invested had turned into ashes. It was no wonder that the emperor was so angry. Chapter 1191. A few moments later, many of the officials who had read the memorials had grave expressions. They could clearly see the severity of the situation. Many of them were even thinking, if the 5-star army used the momentum of their victory to suddenly attack Tulu City, what would they do? Would Shurheng, who had already suffered defeat, be able to defend the city? If he couldn't defend it once the 5-star army broke in, the Baiming army would be forced into an internal battle. This was an extremely dangerous matter. Once Baiming's capital was attacked, it would affect their own interests and safety. The officials had no choice but to take this matter seriously. Of course, there were also people like Su Yozhen, who had long since submitted to Yang Chendong. He pretended to have a grave expression on his face, but he was actually very happy on the inside. For him, once the 5-star army entered the city, he would openly become a high-ranking official of the Xianxia. He might even be treated even better. "You've all read it. Tell me, how should we deal with this?" During this time, Zhu Qiu had already steadied her mind. When she looked at the ministers, her eyes were full of hope. "Your Majesty, Tulu City is a gateway. We can't lose it. Your Majesty, Shurheng's defeat cannot be avoided. He should be heavily punished and replaced with a new commander. Your Majesty, the 5-star army is coming with menacing momentum and cannot be resisted. There is no harm in sending someone to talk to him and see if he can be persuaded to withdraw." Your Majesty. After Zhu Qiu asked this question, there were all kinds of comments below. There were all kinds of suggestions which made people feel a little dizzy after listening to them. Zhu Qiu had no choice but to roar, "Enough. All of you shut up. We are the emperor, and Yang Chendong is just a lowly bugnom of Gojouzian. We even conferred him the title, so how can we lower our heads to him? Let's not talk about peace talks anymore. As for replacing the commander, do you have any suitable candidates in mind?" After expressing that he would not lower his head to Yang Chendong, he asked about the candidate for the new commander. At this moment, the entire hall was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. Although Xianxia was a little greedy for money and power, it had to be said that he still had some skills in war. Moreover, over the years he had already built up enough prestige in the army. How could Baiming have a backup for such a handsome man? Now that it was said that there was a change in leadership, who would be able to take on this important responsibility? After asking, there was no response for a long time. Zhu Xian knew that it was impossible to change the commander. In this case he had to settle for the second best and said, "Everyone has read the memorial. Although Marquis Wuxia has the leadership responsibility this time, he is not the main reason. He is still in his position. Let's forget about the proposal of changing the commander. Now let's talk about the problem of how to defend Tulu City first. If anyone has any opinions, feel free to raise them." Zhu Qiu also knew that there were people in the imperial court who had a close relationship with Xianxia. If he showed that he wanted to change the commander or did not trust him, these words would inevitably spread out. This would have a negative effect on his control over Xianxia. This was not what he wanted to see now. Naturally, they would be punished after losing the battle. However, how to punish them and when to punish them still needed to be discussed at length. At least in the current situation, they absolutely could not be punished. Not only that, they also needed to be rewarded to stabilize the people's hearts. This was the so-called way of using people. Send troops, a large number of reinforcements. Don't we have millions of soldiers in training? Pick some of the elites and send them to Tulu City. No matter what, we have to defend it. With the high walls and thick city walls, we can fight an offensive and defensive battle like the first city. As long as the battle lasts for a long time with strong strength, the 5-star army will be defeated in the end. The Minister of War Yi Ming stood up and put forward his own opinion. As the Minister of War, Yi Ming's authority was even greater than that of the previous Minister of War. This was all because Baiming took on a large number of training troops to prepare for war. Anyway, he was very comfortable and proud as the Minister of War. Yes, Minister Yi is right. I think that not only should we send troops to defend the city, but we can also find an opportunity to fight outside the city. In this way we may be able to catch the 5-star army by surprise. It is not impossible to regain the initiative on the battlefield. Your Majesty, no matter what, the first city has been besieged for a long time. After such a long defensive battle, its strength should be at its weakest. We can't miss this opportunity. Grand Young Master Fu, Grand Scholar and Minister of Justice Su Yozhen also stood up and put forward their opinions. Hearing that they would take the initiative to attack and catch the 5-star army off guard, Zhu Qiu's eyes couldn't help but brighten. He looked at Su Yozhen with admiration and said, "Minister Su's words are reasonable. Minister Yi, we might as well do it. Inform Xianxia to find an opportunity to fight outside the city." Yes. Yi Ming immediately agreed. The originally celebratory court banquet thus ended. Everyone had a lot on their minds. They only hoped that Xianxia could turn the tide and allow them to continue to abuse their power in the capital. However, when one official walked out of the hall, he was extremely worried. He was the Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions move first. Once he increased the number of troops sent to Tulu, it would involve tens of millions of money and provisions. This was his responsibility and also his source of worry. Not long ago he gave the provisions that he had saved not long ago to General Li Tong in the Liaodong region. Although he had some now, it was beyond his ability to provide for hundreds of thousands of troops. In the face of such a large army that suddenly set out, where would he get the provisions? It was about to enter autumn. This year's provisions had not been completely conquered. If the army's expedition was delayed because of this, wouldn't he be a sinner? After leaving the imperial palace, Jin Lian gravely said, "Come on, let's not go back to the residence. Let's go straight to the Su residence." In the end he decided to discuss this matter with Su Yozhen. Back then, it had been Su Yozhen who had suggested that he send provisions to Li Tong. Now that there was a problem, he naturally wanted to hear his opinion. Within the Su residence, Su Yozhen had only just entered when the steward came to report that the Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian, had arrived and was waiting outside. "Oh, so fast?" Su Yozhen's expression did not change as he smiled and said, "Minister Jin, please come to the main hall for a talk." Su Yozhen and Jin Lian met in the main hall and the latter sighed. "Lord Su, you've really made me suffer this time. Su Youzhen feigned ignorance and asked, Lord Jin, did you say this? Oh, Lord Su, do you still remember how you suggested that I send provisions to General Li Tong in the Liaodong region? Jin Lian had no idea that Su Youzhen was feigning ignorance, only that he had been so busy that he had forgotten, so he reminded him. Oh, there was such a matter. At that time General Li Tong sent someone to find my steward and gave him 20,000 taels of silver. Oh right, didn't I give Lord Jin 10,000 taels? What, is there something else? Su Youzhen purposely mentioned the 10,000 taels of silver to tell Jin Lian that he had accepted a bribe. If this matter was blown out of proportion it would not be good for anyone. Jin Lian was stunned. He had also forgotten about the 10,000 taels of silver. Now that he thought about it, it was not that the time had not come yet. For a moment his tone weakened. Lord Su, you're right. However, the Emperor wants to send troops to attack the 5-star army. How much provisions would that require? Our Ministry of Revenue does not have that much. You don't have any. Su Youzhen had already sent people to investigate the Ministry of Revenue's warehouse, but he still pretended to be ignorant. Yes, we don't. I'm not afraid of Lord Su's ridicule, but in the past few years, our Baiming has expanded the army quickly, putting great pressure on our Ministry of Revenue. Although we have some now, it is only for daily training. Once it is used in battle it will not be enough. When Jin Lian said this he was about to cry. In contrast to the Minister of War Yi Ming, the other was very satisfied. His Ministry of Revenue had always been tight. If he had not intentionally saved from all sides, there would have been problems long ago. Yi Ming was a qualified official. At least he was very good at saving money. It was a pity that even the cleverest housewife could not cook without rice. He did not have any good ideas. These words were very pitiful, but in Su Youzhen's ears he said with an indifferent expression, since it's not enough, then just report it directly. Directly report it, Lord Su is saying, report it to the Emperor? As if he had misheard, Yi Ming asked with his mouth wide open. Of course it is to report it to the Emperor. I say, Lord Yi, the food was indeed given to General Li Tong. There is nothing shameful about it. In any case, as the Minister of Revenue, you have already done your best. Our wise Emperor can understand. Su Youzhen appeared very relaxed. He wasn't trying to shirk his responsibility. Instead, it was his sincere way of dealing with the situation. After all, the amount of food they lacked was too great. Today, Zhu Qiu's intention was not to send 30 to 50,000. It was very likely that he would send 100,000 or 200,000 would be normal. With so many people, how much food would they need? Even if they could find a way to get some, it would not be a solution after a long time. Thus, reporting it was a matter of time. Since it was so, it was better to report it in the morning. This could be considered as pouring cold water on Daizong. It also let him know that fighting a war was not as simple as just talking. It needed money and food. If they were not willing to spend money, they would not be able to fight a war, much less win a war. Su Youzhen said twice to report the matter to the Emperor, and Yi Ming finally faced it seriously. After careful consideration, it seemed that this was the only path he could take. Although it was inevitable that he would be reprimanded if he reported it like this, and he might even be punished, he was not an immortal. He could not conjure food, so he could only do this. Well, Lord Su, I will report to the Emperor tomorrow, but I will have to trouble Lord Su to help me beat the drum. Now, who doesn't know that the Emperor relies on Lord Su very much? This time you have to save me. Well said, well said. Tomorrow I will meet the Emperor with Lord Yi. It just so happens that I have something to report to the Emperor. Su Youzhen nodded. He urgently needed to complete the task handed over by Yang Chendong, so he had to get the first-hand information. If he could go with Yi Ming, he would owe him a favor and get the information. Wouldn't it be the best of both worlds? Chapter 1192. Most importantly, he could also take the opportunity to persuade Daizong to be cautious. Yang Chendong said that they only needed to wait for 2 more months and the safety of the beginning city would be impregnable. At that time, even if Baiming sent out an army, they would not be afraid. Although he did not know why all of this was done, since Yang Chendong said it, Su Youzhen could only choose to believe it. Furthermore, he only needed to delay the Northern Ming dynasty for 2 months. This was not a difficult task. With Su Youzhen's guarantee, Yi Ming left with satisfaction. However, what was unexpected was that the next morning, Ming went directly to the entrance of Su Mansion and acted as if he wanted to accompany Su Yozhen to the court. It was obvious that he was afraid that Su Yozhen would find an excuse to run away. Lord Yi, you don't believe me. After leaving the mansion and seeing Ming's sedan, Su Yozhen knocked on the other party with an unhappy expression. I'm sorry. I need Lord Su's help. Please forgive me. However, Lord Su, don't worry. After today I will definitely apologize to Lord Su. Ming showed a pitiful look and looked at Su Yozhen with a sad gaze. Then let's go. Su Yozhen pretended to be in a difficult position and said. However, when he returned to the sedan, his face was not ugly at all. Not only that, but he was also a little excited. Being able to build a good relationship with Ming would only be of great help to him in understanding Ming's economic strength. This time the other party owed him a favor. In the future, when he inquired about some things, it would be easier for him to get information. The two ministers of the imperial court entered the palace together and participated in the court meeting. After the meeting, the two of them went to the back hall to meet Zhu Qiu. In the back hall, when Ming and Su Yozhen had just knelt down, Zhu Qiu took the lead to speak. Minister Yi, you have to hurry up and prepare the amount of money for the army mobilization. Before the army is mobilized, the provisions have to be prepared first. Your responsibility is great. Your Majesty. I'm guilty. Ming's face was full of sadness. If one looked carefully, one would see that his eyes were a little red. At this moment, Ming's appearance definitely had the potential to become a movie star. You're guilty? What crime is there? Zhu Qiu looked at Ming, who was still kneeling on the ground, and had a bad feeling. Your Majesty, it's like this. The grain reserves of our Ministry of Revenue are not enough to support a large-scale war. Now Without waiting for Ming to finish speaking, Zhu Qiu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, almost jumped up. What did you say? There was no more food. Where did they go? Wasn't last year's harvest pretty good? I remember that the price of food is not high. Don't you know how to collect more? They were about to send out their troops, and now Ming was telling them that they didn't have any provisions. Wasn't this just tearing down their stage? How could he not be angry? Seeing that the emperor was indeed infuriated by the dragon debate, the kneeling Ming hurriedly explained, Yes, your Majesty is right. Last year's harvest was good and the price of grain wasn't high, but we weren't the only one collecting grain. Many big clans and merchants were also collecting grain. Their prices were even a little higher than the government, so most of the grain was taken away by them. The common people often said that it was hard for the people in bad years, but it was even harder for the people in good years. This was referring to the problem of grain prices. When the harvest was bad, grain production was low and grain prices were high. Other than handing over their grain, the common people had nothing left. Because there was no grain to sell, they couldn't make any profit. On the other hand, when the harvest was good, grain prices were especially low, and they couldn't make much money. They could only scrape together enough to eat. This was the common people's sorrow. Compared to those big families, they were different. When the price of food was low, they would buy in large quantities and hoard them. Then when the price of food was high, they would sell it in exchange for a large amount of money. It was difficult to say that they would suffer a loss. Over time, they relied on this kind of business to make money, and their hearts became wild. It developed to the point where they fought with the government to buy grain. The same grain, different prices. Farmers would definitely be willing to sell to the side with a higher price. This also caused Ming to not be able to buy much grain. Taken away. Zhu Qiu had already stood up angrily from the dragon throne. Then he kept pacing back and forth to show the anger in his heart. As the emperor, he was actually aware of the grain problem. He was even aware of who was stirring up trouble and reselling the grain. However, the influence of these people wasn't small. Once they joined forces, it would involve many aspects, to the point that he couldn't help but be afraid. This was also the reason why he couldn't do anything even though he knew that someone was collecting grain. Is it possible to buy some grain from those people at a fair price? After pacing back and forth a few times, Zhu Qiu suddenly turned around and asked the kneeling Ming. Your Majesty. With a bitter expression, Ming said, It's impossible to buy grain at a fair price. Adding some money shouldn't be a problem. After all, they are Ming's subjects. They should also contribute to Ming. And then how much money do you need to add? Hearing that there was a way, Zhu Qiu's face revealed a trace of expectation. This. Yiming didn't immediately answer. Instead he calculated in his heart. Then he raised his head and stretched out a hand. 10%. When Zhu Qiu saw that it was only one hand, his expression became much more relaxed. No, it's 50%. Yiming opened up his hand as he spoke. At this moment there were 5 hands. What? They are profiting from the country's crisis. They are forcing me. When he heard that it was 50%, Zhu Qiu immediately became unhappy. As a result, the original 30,000 jin of grain could only buy 20,000 jin. This price difference was too high. Zhu Qiu cursed these profiteers and rich families in his heart. However, he didn't have any better methods to deal with them. Who asked these people to exist to represent the interests of too many people? Once he lost the support of these people, it would be hard to say if his throne would be stable. Unable to make an example out of these people, Zhu Qiu could only lower his tone and ask, "Is there any other method?" No. His head shook like a rattle drum. Yiming continuously shook his head. If he really had a better method, he wouldn't have come here to be scolded. If there isn't, then what are you doing as the Minister of Revenue? Finally, the thunderous anger that Yiming imagined appeared. At this moment he lowered his head and gave a look to Su Yozhen who came with him. This was the time to see the use of an alliance. Su Yozhen had been waiting for an opportunity. If he didn't let Zhu Qiu understand some things, it would be hard to say what he wanted to say. Seeing that the time had come, if it was any later, Yiming might be punished. If another Minister of Revenue came up, it might not be beneficial to his work. He finally slowly raised his head, holding the ceremonial tablet in his hand, and said, "Emperor, please calm down. This subject has a way to solve the food problem." Zhu Qiu, who was really angry, even wanted to punish Yiming. Su Yozhen's words instantly extinguished a lot of his anger. "Beloved Minister Su, you said you have a method?" "That's right. Although this subject's method can't solve the problem immediately, we only need to wait for a month or so. When this year's rations arrive, the problem will be solved." Su Yozhen raised her head and spoke with a righteous expression. "Wait for more than a month?" Zhu Qiu repeated after hearing that. "Yes, it's only a month. It won't delay the army's departure. Saving this time can save us a lot of money. No matter how you look at it, it's a profit. When the time comes, we can use the same price to compete with them. I believe the people will support the government more. Speaking of money, this subject has an idea that I want to report to the emperor." Using money to talk about the matter, Su Yozhen talked about the other topic that he had come for today. When the matter of money was brought up, Zhu Qiu clearly became nervous. The longer he had been the emperor, the more he knew the benefits of money. Without money, it really was hard to move forward. He even thought that if he didn't have money, would people still listen to him? "Beloved Minister Su, we are listening." "Yes, Your Majesty. Since this subject has taken charge of the Ministry of Justice, I've found that there are often insufficient prison cells. This is because there are too many people who don't follow self-discipline. Of course, there are also some people who make mistakes in the heat of the moment. They have said more than once that they want to repent, but they don't have the chance. Because of this, many people have come to this subject. There are even some people who want to use money to redeem themselves. This way we can give those who have always been good a chance to repent. At the same time, we can alleviate the problem of insufficient prison cells. This subject has thought about it again and again. This subject doesn't have the authority to make such a big decision, so this subject asks for Your Majesty's instructions. Use money to redeem people? Won't that cause problems?" Zhu Qiu quickly grasped the crux of the matter. "It won't. Not all crimes can be redeemed with money. Only when the crime isn't serious and the person has the intention to turn over a new leaf will it be allowed. As for the specific details, our Ministry of Justice will send people to carefully verify them." That's right, there was a child surnamed Qin who had always been good. When he was preparing to take the exam to become a county official, he drank too much and unintentionally injured someone. It was only a minor injury. Our local constable arrived soon after. In the end, he was sentenced to 3 months in prison. Speaking of which, the crime wasn't serious and the time he spent in prison wasn't very long. However, the problem was that it would delay his chances of passing the exam and even affect his future. The Qin family came to me because of this matter. They were willing to compensate the person who was beaten and also wanted to redeem him. Oh, they were prepared to pay 5,000 taels of silver to redeem him. Chapter 1193. So much silver, but it's just a light injury? Zhou Xian listened carefully. When he heard that such a small matter could bring 5,000 taels of silver into the national treasury, his eyes widened with a look of disbelief. Yes, this is the price that they offered. This subject has thought about it. Since this matter concerns a person's future, and the Qin family is a respectable family, a mere 5,000 taels is not enough. No matter what, it has to be doubled. We have to ask for 10,000 taels. Su Youzhen's tone was normal, but the result of her words shocked Zhou Qiu. It was just injuring someone and being punished with 3 months of imprisonment. If they let the person go, they could get 10,000 taels. This deal was too easy to make. If everything was like this, then he would biming how many children with the surname Qin. How much money could their national treasury earn in a year? This was a great plan to make a fortune. With money they could do many things. When the time came, would they have to worry about not being able to destroy their opponents? The excited Zhou Qiu once again paced back and forth in the Dragon Palace. After pacing back and forth several times, he finally made up his mind and said, "All right, Xin understands the matter. The specifics will be handled by beloved official Su, but those who have committed heinous crimes cannot be released. Also, Xin will not mention this matter to anyone else, nor will Xin agree. Do you understand?" Zhou Qiu wanted to be a whore, but he also wanted to establish a chastity. If nothing happened, he could earn enough money. Something big happened, he could push off the blame. Su Youzhen originally did not expect the emperor to issue a decree. If it really was done, wouldn't the rich be able to do whatever they wanted? He only needed the emperor to know about this matter. The specifics would naturally be handled by him. As for whether or not this matter would attract the opposition of the other officials, he was not afraid. Not to mention that he had countless methods to force the opposing officials to shut their mouths. He also had Yang Qindong as an escape route. He did this in order to disrupt the social order of Biming. If he could not stay here, Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely ensure his safety. Yi Ming, who should have been beaten with a board, was not punished because of Su Youzhen. In the end, they agreed to postpone the departure of the army for more than a month. They would set out to the grasslands after the autumn harvest. The two ministers walked out of the palace together. Along the way, Yi Ming expressed his gratitude many times. "Su Darren, His Majesty's fondness for you is truly envious of others." After a round of thanks, Yi Ming spoke of his thoughts on today's matter. "Yi Darren is overpraising me. All this is just what a subject should do." Su Youzhen chuckled. Today's meeting with the saint was like killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Not only did he delay Biming's deployment of troops, but he also owed Yi Ming a favor. At the same time, he also planted the seeds of chaos in Biming's social order. This time he had made a great contribution in front of Yang Qindong. If all the officials were like Lord Su, then who would be a match for our Biming? It's just that there's one thing this lowly official doesn't understand. Yi Ming was a primary second-rank official. Su Youzhen was a secondary first-rank official. It wasn't wrong to use the word lowly official. This was enough to prove Yi Ming's admiration for Su Youzhen at this moment. "Yi Darren, please don't say that. If there's anything, we can discuss it with each other." Su Youzhen naturally wouldn't be arrogant and returned with a smile. "All right, then this lowly official will speak presumptuously. Just now, Su Darren said that depending on the situation, those people can be ransomed. I wonder what the standard is." Yi Ming finally asked what he wanted to ask. In his opinion, there was no standard at all. If there had to be one, it would all depend on Su Youzhen's words. If Su Youzhen thought that it could be redeemed, then it was the same as committing the crime of murder. On the other hand, if he thought that it couldn't be done, then you had to hold on even if you were wrongly accused. In this way, how much power would this be? How many high-ranking officials and nobles would be able to make friends with this matter? Over time, once enough of a net was formed, it would be difficult for the emperor to move against Su Youzhen in the future. There would be many constraints and difficulties. "Oh, this matter, there are no regulations now, but there will definitely be in the future. Well, if Yi Darren has any friends who need help, just ask." Su Youzhen knew that Yi Ming saw through the trick in this matter, but he was not afraid. Everyone was good. He wouldn't deliberately target anyone. On the contrary, he was very willing to do some favors. Yiming wanted this sentence. After all, Su Youzhen was the Minister of Justice. He was the boss of this matter. He couldn't intervene even if he wanted to. Being able to get this promise once there was a friend who needed help in the future, he would also have some confidence. Ha, thank you, Su Darren. Yiming clasped his fist and laughed. Well said, ha. Su Youzhen also clasped his fist and laughed. The Baiming army delayed the time to re-enter the grassland because of the grain and fodder. When the news appeared in front of Yang Qindong in the form of a telegram, he also breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Very good. The new grain will only be harvested after more than a month. At that time it will take more than 3 months to collect grain by grain and mobilize the army. There is no need to worry about the beginning city." The alliance between the Baiming army and the Walla army had indeed brought a lot of trouble to Yang Qindong. At one point, it even almost caused the new First Army and the new Second Army to be completely wiped out. Even now, thinking back on the dangers involved, it was still so frightening. If the matter of the Shaowei province had not been resolved quickly enough, he was afraid that he would not have been able to save the beginning city in time. Now, Yang Qindong's strength was expanding rapidly, especially after he took over the small Wu province, which gave him more foundation. More than 500,000 of the original Wu soldiers were captured and surrendered, which gave him more confidence in doing things. Yang Qindong's strength was expanding rapidly, especially after he took over the small Wu province, which gave him more confidence in doing things. Send a telegram to the small Japanese empire and ask them to speed up the reorganization of the army. The first echelon, 50,000 people, will set off in half a month at the latest and enter the Liaodong region. They will appear in front of the beginning city in 2.5 months at the latest. Send a telegram to Qiqian City and ask Castellan Yuqian to prepare more food and supplies to the Shaowei province by sea. Half a month later, they will follow the army to the Liaodong region. Send a telegram to the person in charge of the security bureau in the capital of Baiming. Commend Su Youzhen for his recent work. At the same time, take out 1 million taels of silver as a fund for activities. At the same time, pay attention to the safety of my family, the Hu family, and other close people of this king. A series of orders came from Yang Qindong's mouth. Only then did Yang Qindong walk out of the military tent energetically. Outside the military tent, there was smoke rising from the kitchen. It was obviously time for lunch. Pass down the order. After lunch, the troops will speed up and arrive at Shajing City as soon as possible. At the same time, inform the 4th Army Division at the back to speed up their march. Yang Qindong could not wait any longer. He had to launch a sudden attack while the Walla cavalry's morale was low. Otherwise, if he did not remove the roots of the weeds, they would grow again when the spring breeze came. Once Yes Hen escaped, it would be difficult to find him in the vast grassland. This was the reason why he only brought these troops to Hanoi. He was afraid that if he brought too many troops, Yes Hen would escape without a fight. He was especially afraid that he would escape to the north. In that case, he would really be letting the tiger return to the mountain. Hanoi region, disorderly Well city. Those who had fled back were the first to enter the city with their cavalry in a somewhat sorry state. When they left the city, they were so arrogant, leading 150,000 elite cavalrymen. But when they returned, there were less than 30,000 cavalrymen. Moreover, they had lost their food. Anyone with eyes could see the result of this battle. As one of the 4 most important generals under Xianxia, and the only remaining one, Bo Mu led his cavalry out of the city gates to welcome Xianxia. When he saw Xianxian's dusty appearance, he immediately rode up and asked with concern, "Leader, if there's anything, we'll talk about it when we get back." Noticing that there were many people looking at him at the city gate, Yes Hen shook his head gently and gave Bo Mu a look. The army smoothly entered the city and soon came to the general's mansion. When there was no one else, Yes Hen took off his armor and said something that surprised Bo Mu. "This time we lost. The 5-star army has been chasing us. For safety's sake, we must leave here." "Leave here?" But Bo Mu said with a puzzled expression. The reason why the Vala tribe was able to maintain their current strength, especially after the appearance of the 5-star army and the destruction of the Tatars' main forces, was because they were able to maintain their strength. Even after the surrender of countless Mongol tribes, they were still able to grow and expand. The most fundamental reason was that they were able to occupy a city. In the past, the Mongolian cavalry was used to moving around and attacking in a wandering manner. Usually they were herders, but once they found a target, they would transform into fierce grassland wolves, burning, killing, robbing, and plundering. There was no evil that they would not do. This was their nature and also the environment. The advantage was that they did not have a fixed residence. Even if they had enemies who wanted to take revenge, it would be difficult to find them. The disadvantage was that it was difficult for them to develop and grow. Because they did not have a fixed location, they relied on plundering to make a living, and there was no opportunity to develop. In view of these problems, Xianxia made a bold decision, and that was to change from wandering to fixed. He sent troops to occupy the cities of the Great Ming Dynasty, and learned from the Great Ming Dynasty's yamen to manage the cities. He allowed outsiders to do business and farm here, and they only charged a certain amount of money. Needless to say, this way they really did develop. Slowly, with money they could recruit soldiers and buy everything they needed. Gradually, Wara people were no longer a nomadic people and they were evolving into the Han people. If they continued to develop like this, it was inevitable that they would become stronger and stronger. Once the time was right, it was not impossible to overthrow the old regime and establish a new empire. But now Xianxia wanted to change his previous decision and return to a nomadic life. It was no wonder that Bomir was so surprised and confused. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.